Blood pooled beneath the gurney while the heart monitor shrieked its flatline scream. 3 senior physicians stood paralyzed, arguing in panic, while a 28-year-old trauma nurse they'd spent 6 months humiliating shoved past them and barked, "Get out of my way or he dies." Nobody knew who Sergeant Cassidy Brennan really was. Nobody knew what her hands had done in Kandahar when mortar fire turned field hospitals into slaughterhouses. They just saw a quiet blonde nurse with tired eyes who never talked back, until the night a dying patient arrived with no ID and catastrophic internal bleeding, and the woman they'd mocked like disposable staff became the only person in that room who knew how to keep him breathing. Before we begin, stay with me until the very end of this story. Drop a like, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. Cassidy Brennan's first shift at Mercy Ridge Medical Center in Columbus started with Dr. Marcus Holloway calling her "Sweetie" in front of 12 residents. "Sweetie, we don't need combat field tricks here," he said, smiling like he'd just given her career advice. "This is real medicine." The residents laughed. Cassidy didn't. She stood in her navy scrubs with her blonde hair pulled back tight, her posture so straight it made people uncomfortable. Her blue eyes stayed flat and unreadable. She'd learned that look overseas, the one that said nothing, revealed nothing, promised nothing. "Understood, doctor," she said quietly. Holloway patted her shoulder like she was a child. "Good. Now go check on the sutures in Bay 3. Cassidy walked away without another word. Behind her, one of the residents muttered something about military wannabes, and the group erupted in laughter again. She didn't turn around. That was February. By August, the bullying had become systematic. Dr. Holloway ran the emergency department like a kingdom, and he'd decided from day one that Cassidy was a threat. Not because she was incompetent, because she was too competent. She caught things he missed. She questioned orders that didn't make sense. She had a clinical instinct that made the older nurses trust her instantly and made the doctors feel exposed. So Holloway made her pay for it. He blocked her from trauma cases. He reassigned her to intake and paperwork. He publicly corrected her during rounds even when she was right, then privately changed the orders to match what she'd suggested. He made sure everyone knew she was just a nurse, nothing more. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was watching patients suffer because of his ego. One night in late July, a 52-year-old construction worker came in, complaining of back pain after a fall. The attending physician ordered x-rays and sent him home with muscle relaxers. Cassidy pulled the doctor aside in the hallway. "His pupils are uneven," she said quietly, "and he's got Battle's sign behind his left ear. We should get a CT. The doctor, a second-year resident named Palmer, waved her off. "It's a bruise. He fell on his back, not his head." "He doesn't remember falling," Cassidy pressed. "That's a red flag." Palmer's face hardened. "Are you a doctor now?" "No, but I've seen enough head trauma to—" "Then stay in your lane." The man was discharged 20 minutes later. He collapsed in the parking lot before he reached his truck. By the time they got him back inside, the brain bleed had already caused irreversible damage. He died 3 hours later in the ICU. Cassidy sat in the break room afterward, staring at her hands. Nobody said anything to her. Nobody apologized. Palmer filed an incident report that blamed delayed triage response times. Dr. Holloway signed off on it without question. The case was closed before the family even got the autopsy results. Cassidy stopped trying to speak up after that, not because she didn't care, because she'd learned the hard way that some battles can't be won from the bottom. But she kept watching, she kept learning, and she kept her hands ready for the day someone would finally need them. Woke. The breaking point came on a Wednesday in mid-October. Cassidy was restocking trauma bays when Dr. Holloway walked in with his usual entourage of residents. He was in the middle of some lecture about chest tube placement, gesturing dramatically like he was performing for an audience. "The key is confidence," he said. "Patients can smell hesitation. You need to project authority." One of the residents noticed Cassidy and smirked. "Maybe Nurse Brennan can show us her field medic version," he said. The group laughed. Holloway grinned. "I'm sure it involves duct tape and prayer." More laughter. Cassidy kept organizing supplies, her face expressionless. Holloway stepped closer. "You know what your problem is, Brennan," he said. "You think trauma care is about speed, but real medicine is about precision. That's why you'll always be holding retractors while people like me make the actual decisions." Cassidy turned slowly. Her voice came out quiet and even. Is that what you told the Hendricks family? The room went silent. Holloway's smile disappeared. Excuse me? James Hendricks, Cassidy said. The construction worker with the subdural hematoma you missed in July. I told Dr. Palmer to order a CT scan. You signed off on the discharge. Holloway's face turned red. That case was reviewed and cleared. By you. Watch yourself, Brennan. Cassidy held his stare. I am watching, she said quietly. That's the problem. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Holloway stepped forward until he was inches from her face. You're done here, he said, his voice shaking with rage. I'm recommending your immediate termination for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment. Cassidy didn't blink. Do what you need to do, Doctor. Holloway stormed out with his residents trailing behind him like ducklings. The moment the door closed, one of the older nurses, a woman named Rita, who'd worked at Mercy Ridge for 20 years, put a hand on Cassidy's shoulder. You shouldn't have said that, Rita whispered. I know. He's going to bury you. I know. Rita squeezed her shoulder gently. For what it's worth, you were right about Hendricks. Cassidy nodded but didn't say anything. She'd been right about a lot of things. It never mattered. The termination hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Cassidy spent the weekend in her apartment, staring at the discharge papers from her Army service that she kept in a drawer. Honorable discharge after 6 years attached to Ranger medevac units in Afghanistan. 3 commendations for valor under fire. A medical record that included shrapnel scars and a psych evaluation that cleared her for civilian work but noted difficulty adjusting to hierarchical conflict. She almost laughed at that last part. Hierarchical conflict. That was one way to describe working under a man who valued ego over evidence. On Monday morning, she walked into the hospital expecting to be escorted out by security. Instead, she found chaos. The emergency department was completely overrun. Every bed full, every hallway packed with gurneys, every nurse moving at a dead sprint. The waiting room looked like a disaster film. People holding bloody towels to their heads, parents cradling injured children, a man slumped in a wheelchair with an obviously broken leg. Rita grabbed Cassidy the moment she walked in. Thank God you're here, she gasped. Multi-vehicle pileup on I-71. Bridge icing caused a chain reaction. 30-plus casualties incoming, half of them critical. Cassidy's instincts kicked in instantly. Where's Holloway? In surgery. He's been stuck in an OR for 2 hours with a ruptured spleen case. We've got 2 attendings down with flu, and the trauma chief is at a conference in Cleveland. Who's running triage? Rita's face said everything. Palmer? Cassidy's stomach dropped. Dr. Palmer, the same resident who'd missed the head bleed, was the senior physician on the floor. We're about to lose people, Cassidy said flatly. I know, Rita whispered, but you're not cleared to I don't care about cleared. Cassidy pushed past her and moved into the trauma bay. The first wave hit 10 minutes later. Ambulances screamed into the ambulance bay one after another, medics shouting vitals and injuries before the doors even opened. Cassidy moved between gurneys like she was back in Kandahar, her brain shifting into combat mode without conscious thought. Triage tags. Red, yellow, green, black. She tagged a woman with a tension pneumothorax as red and shoved the gurney toward an open bay. Get me a 14-gauge needle and prepped for a chest decompression, she shouted. A nurse hesitated. Shouldn't we wait for... Now. The nurse ran. Cassidy tagged a man with a broken arm as yellow, then tagged a teenager with lacerations as green. She moved fast, trusting the training that had kept soldiers alive when everything was on fire and the world was ending. Palmer appeared beside her, looking overwhelmed. Brennan, you're not supposed to be... Shut up and listen, Cassidy snapped. The woman in Bay 2 needs a chest tube in the next 3 minutes or she dies. The man in Bay 4 has a pelvic fracture and probable internal bleeding. Get him into imaging immediately. The kid in Bay 6 is stable but scared. Someone needs to sit with him before he goes into shock. Palmer stared at her. You can't just... Do you want to save them or do you want to argue? Palmer's mouth opened and closed. Then he nodded and moved toward Bay 2. Cassidy kept working. The next 2 hours were a blur of blood, screaming monitors, and barked orders. She moved between patients like a machine, stabilizing the ones who could be saved and quietly marking the ones who couldn't. The staff followed her lead without question because she was the only person in that building who seemed to know what the hell she was doing. And then the last ambulance arrived. The medic who jumped out looked rattled. "We've got a John Doe," he shouted. "Major trauma, no ID, found pinned in the wreckage. GCS of 6 at the scene, hypotensive, tachycardic. We've pushed 2 liters of saline and he's still circling the drain." Cassidy looked at the gurney as they rolled it past. The patient was a large man, mid-50s, unconscious and covered in blood. His pelvis was visibly deformed, crushed probably, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. "Bay 1!" Cassidy shouted. "Move!" They got him inside and transferred him to the bed. Cassidy did a rapid assessment while Rita cut away his clothes. Massive pelvic trauma, probable hemorrhagic shock, blood pressure dropping fast. "Start another IV line," Cassidy ordered, "and get me 4 units of O negative." Palmer appeared at her shoulder. "What's the status?" "Pelvic fracture with internal bleeding," Cassidy said without looking up. "We need to get him to surgery now or he's going to bleed out." Palmer checked the monitor and frowned. "BP's at 80/50. He's stable enough for imaging first." Cassidy's head snapped up. "He's not stable. He's compensating. The second his body gives up, he's gone. We need to know what we're dealing with before we cut him open." "We know what we're dealing with. He's bleeding internally and we're running out of time." Palmer's jaw tightened. "I'm the attending physician, Brennan. We're getting a CT scan." Cassidy stared at him for one long, cold moment. Then she stepped back. "Fine. Your call, doctor." They wheeled the patient toward imaging. Cassidy stood in the trauma bay, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from rage. She'd seen this before. In Kandahar, hesitation killed people. Every second spent debating was a second the patient didn't have. Rita touched her arm gently. "You did what you could," she whispered. Cassidy didn't answer. Mata. The patient coded in the CT scanner. Flatline alarm, full arrest, chaos. They rushed him back to the trauma bay and started CPR, but Cassidy knew it was already too late. His heart had stopped because his blood volume had dropped below critical levels. Chest compressions wouldn't fix that. He needed surgery. He needed it 10 minutes ago. Palmer stood at the head of the bed, barking orders that made no sense. "Push epi! Charge to 200. They shocked him. Nothing. Again. They shocked him again. Still nothing. The monitor kept screaming. Cassidy stood near the wall, watching the scene unfold with a terrible sense of déjà vu. She'd watched good men die because officers made bad calls. She wasn't going to watch it happen again. "He's bleeding out," Cassidy said loudly. Palmer ignored her. "Push another round of epi." "He doesn't need epinephrine," Cassidy said, stepping forward. "He needs blood flow restored to his core." "Stay back, Brennan." Cassidy moved closer. "He's in hemorrhagic shock. CPR won't save him. You need to control the bleeding or he's dead." Palmer spun toward her, his face red. "Get out of this room. Listen to me. Security." 2 security guards appeared at the door. Palmer pointed at Cassidy. "Remove her. Now." The guards hesitated, looking at Cassidy. She looked back at the dying man on the gurney, at the monitor shrieking its endless flatline, at Palmer, who was so deep in panic he couldn't see the obvious solution. Then she looked at Rita. Rita's eyes were filled with helpless frustration, and Cassidy made a choice. She stepped forward, shoving past Palmer. "What are you—" "Get out of my way!" Her voice was cold, flat, absolute. It was the voice she'd used in combat zones when there was no time for debate. Palmer grabbed her arm. "You're done, Brennan. You're, Cassidy twisted out of his grip and slammed him backward with one sharp shove. He stumbled into the wall, shocked. The entire room went silent. Cassidy turned to Rita. "Get me a Reboa kit." Rita stared at her. "Cassidy, you can't—" "Now, Rita." Rita hesitated for one more second. Then she ran. Palmer struggled back to his feet, furious. "You just assaulted a physician. You're going to jail." Cassidy ignored him completely. She moved to the patient's side and felt for the femoral artery. Rita returned with the kit, a resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion device, military-grade trauma equipment that most civilian hospitals didn't even stock. Cassidy opened it and prepped the catheter. "You don't have authorization," Palmer shouted. Cassidy made the incision in the patient's groin. He'll be dead before I get authorization. She threaded the catheter upward with absolute precision, relying purely on muscle memory and battlefield instinct. No imaging, no guidance, just her hands and 6 years of keeping soldiers alive in conditions that would have broken most doctors. Palmer was screaming something about lawsuits. The security guards were asking what they should do. Rita was praying quietly. Cassidy didn't hear any of it. She advanced the catheter carefully, counting the distance, feeling for resistance. Then she inflated the balloon. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. The monitor kept shrieking. The room held its breath. Then, beep, a single heartbeat, weak, irregular. But there, beep, beep. The rhythm steadied. Blood pressure climbed slowly, 60/40, then 70, then 80. The patient wasn't out of danger, but he was alive. Palmer stood frozen, staring at the monitor like he couldn't process what he was seeing. Rita exhaled a sob of relief. And then the trauma bay doors exploded open. Military police stormed inside, armed and wearing tactical gear. Behind them came federal agents in dark suits, followed by hospital security looking completely confused. And behind all of them walked a man in a crisp army uniform with stars on his shoulders. Brigadier General David Carr. The entire emergency department went silent. General Carr's eyes swept the room with cold authority, then locked onto the patient on the gurney. His expression shifted: shock, recognition, fear. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "Colonel Ashford," he said quietly. Nobody answered. The general turned toward Palmer. "Who performed the REBOA insertion?" Palmer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Rita stepped forward. "Nurse Brennan, sir." The general's head turned slowly. His eyes found Cassidy standing near the gurney, still holding the catheter kit, her hands covered in blood. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his expression changed completely. "Sergeant Brennan?" The room seemed to tilt. Cassidy met his eyes and said nothing. General Carr stepped closer, his voice dropping to something quieter, almost disbelieving. "You were with the 75th Ranger Medevac Unit, Kandahar Province, 2019. Cassidy's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." The general looked at the patient, then back at Cassidy. "You just saved Colonel Nathan Ashford's life." Palmer finally found his voice. "She assaulted me. She performed an unauthorized procedure. The general turned toward him with a look that could have melted steel. "Shut your mouth, doctor." Palmer went silent instantly. General Carr gestured toward the military police. "Secure this room. Nobody in or out until we get the colonel stabilized and transported." The MPs moved into position. The general turned back to Cassidy. Colonel Ashford was transporting classified intelligence when his convoy was ambushed on I-71. The accident wasn't an accident. Someone tried to kill him. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Rita gasped. Palmer looked like he might pass out. Cassidy just nodded slowly, her face expressionless. "He'll need emergency surgery," she said quietly. "The balloon bought him time, but it's not a permanent solution." "How much time?" 4 hours, maybe 6 if we're lucky. The general pulled out his phone and made a call. "Get me a medevac chopper and a trauma team. We're moving the colonel to Walter Reed within the hour." He hung up and looked at Cassidy again. "You need to brief the surgical team on what you did. They'll need a full report." Cassidy started to answer, but Palmer interrupted. "She's not qualified to—" "She kept him alive when you couldn't," the general snapped. "That makes her the most qualified person in this building." Palmer's face turned red, but he didn't say another word. General Carr stepped closer to Cassidy and lowered his voice. "The last time I saw you, you were pulling wounded Rangers out of a kill zone under mortar fire. You earned a Bronze Star and turned down officer training because you wanted to stay with your unit." Cassidy's eyes stayed flat. "That was a long time ago, sir." "Not long enough to forget how to save lives." Cassidy didn't answer. The general studied her face for another moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll debrief after the colonel's stable. For now, you stay close. If he crashes again before we can move him, you're the only one I trust to bring him back." He walked away to coordinate the evacuation. Rita grabbed Cassidy's arm, her eyes wide. "You never told me," she whispered. Cassidy pulled off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin. "Nobody asked." Across the room, Palmer stood frozen, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Security guards who'd been about to drag her out now stood aside automatically, and Dr. Marcus Holloway, who'd just arrived from surgery, stood in the doorway, his face pale and stunned as he processed what had just happened. The woman he'd spent 6 months humiliating had just performed a military-grade battlefield procedure in his emergency department, in front of a general, to save the life of a classified intelligence officer. And suddenly, everyone who'd ever mocked her realized they'd been laughing at someone who'd probably saved more lives under fire than they'd see in their entire careers. Cassidy ignored all of them. She washed the blood off her hands and checked the patient's vitals one more time. Colonel Ashford's heart was still beating. That was all that mattered. But as Cassidy stood there in the silent trauma bay, surrounded by soldiers and federal agents and stunned hospital staff, she felt something shift in the air around her. Something that had been coiled tight inside her for 6 months. Something that tasted like justice. And as Dr. Holloway slowly backed out of the room without saying a word, Cassidy allowed herself the smallest, coldest smile. Because the storm was just beginning. The medevac helicopter landed on the hospital roof 40 minutes later, rotors screaming against the October wind. Cassidy rode up in the elevator with Colonel Ashford, 2 MPs, and a silent Rita, who kept staring at her like she'd grown a second head. The surgical team from Walter Reed was already waiting when the doors opened. 3 Army trauma surgeons in flight suits who moved with the kind of precision that told Cassidy they'd done this 1,000 times before. The lead surgeon, a woman with captain's bars and sharp dark eyes, glanced at the monitor and then at Cassidy. "You're the one who placed the Reboe?" "Yes, ma'am." "Blind insertion?" "Yes, ma'am." The captain's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's either incredibly skilled or incredibly stupid." Cassidy's expression didn't change. "He's still breathing." The captain almost smiled. "Fair point. Walk me through it." Cassidy gave a rapid brief while they transferred the colonel to the helicopter gurney. Entry point, catheter depth, balloon inflation timing, estimated blood loss. The captain listened without interrupting, then nodded once. "Clean work, Sergeant." "I'm not a sergeant anymore." "You are to me." They loaded the colonel into the chopper. General Carr appeared at Cassidy's elbow, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I need you to come to Walter Reed for the debrief. There are questions about the ambush that only you might be able to answer." Cassidy frowned. "I don't know anything about—" "You saw the injuries. You stabilized him. The attack pattern matters." Cassidy hesitated, then nodded. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. A car will pick you up at 0600. He handed her a business card with a Pentagon phone number. "Don't discuss this with anyone. Not your colleagues, not your family, not even hospital administration. What happened tonight is now part of an ongoing federal investigation." "Understood, sir." The general studied her face for a moment. "You did good work tonight, Brennan, the kind that saves more than just one life." Then he climbed into the helicopter, and the door slammed shut. Cassidy stepped back as the rotor spun up to full speed. Wind whipped her hair across her face. Rita grabbed her arm to steady herself against the downdraft. The helicopter lifted off and banked east toward Washington. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Rita let out a shaky breath. "What the hell just happened?" Cassidy watched the helicopter disappear into the darkness. "I have no idea." That was a lie. She knew exactly what had happened. The carefully constructed wall she'd built between her military past and her civilian present had just collapsed in front of everyone. And now she'd have to deal with the fallout. They rode the elevator back down in silence. When the doors opened on the emergency department floor, Cassidy could feel the change immediately. Staff members stopped talking when she walked past. Residents stared openly. Even the attending physicians who usually ignored her completely now tracked her movements with wary expressions. Dr. Palmer stood near the nurses' station, his face pale and tight. Dr. Holloway was nowhere to be seen. Rita walked Cassidy to the break room and closed the door behind them. "Sit," she said firmly. Cassidy sat. Rita poured 2 cups of terrible break room coffee and handed one to Cassidy. "Talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Bullshit. You just performed emergency battlefield surgery in front of a general who clearly knows you. That patient was a colonel carrying classified intel. Someone tried to kill him, and now you're being debriefed by the Pentagon." Rita's voice was steady but intense. "So talk." Cassidy wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. I was attached to a Ranger medevac unit in Afghanistan from 2017 to 2020. We provided trauma support for special operations missions, high-risk extractions, casualty evacuations under fire, emergency field surgery when transport wasn't possible. She paused. I was good at it. How good? Good enough that they wanted me to go officer track and train other medics. I turned it down. Why? Because I didn't want to teach. I wanted to save people. Rita sat down across from her. And tonight I saved someone. By breaking about 15 hospital protocols and assaulting a physician. Cassidy looked up, meeting Rita's eyes directly. Would you have let him die? Rita held her gaze for a long moment. Then she sighed. No, I wouldn't have. She took a sip of coffee. But you know Holloway's going to crucify you for this, right? Palmer's already filing an incident report. Security has statements from half a dozen witnesses. You pushed a doctor, performed an unauthorized procedure, and ignored a direct order from the attending physician. I know. You could lose your license. I know. So why did you do it? Cassidy stared down at her coffee. Because I'm tired of watching people die while doctors argue about who has authority. The words came out flat and cold, but Rita heard the anger underneath. That Hendricks case really got to you. All of them get to me, Cassidy said quietly. Every patient Holloway's ego puts at risk. Every call Palmer misses because he's too proud to listen. Every time someone suffers because this place values hierarchy over competence. She looked up. I didn't come back from Kandahar to watch people die for stupid reasons. Rita was quiet for a moment. What was it like over there? Cassidy's jaw tightened. Loud, bloody, honest. Honest? When mortars are falling, nobody cares about rank. They care about who can stop the bleeding. Cassidy's voice went distant. There's no room for ego when you're holding someone's intestines inside their body while they scream. You either know what you're doing or you don't. And if you don't, you get out of the way. Rita studied her face. You miss it. It wasn't a question. Cassidy didn't answer right away. I miss knowing that what I did mattered, she said finally. Over there, every decision was life or death. Every skill I had was essential. I was respected because I earned it. Not because of a title, not because of politics, but because I could do things other people couldn't. She set down the coffee cup. Here? I'm just another nurse who's supposed to shut up and follow orders. Not anymore, Rita said softly. Cassidy looked at her. What do you mean? You think anyone in this hospital is going to see you the same way after tonight? You just pulled off a procedure most of our doctors don't even know exists. In front of military brass. To save a classified intelligence officer. Rita leaned forward. Holloway can file all the complaints he wants. You're untouchable now. Cassidy shook her head. You don't know how these things work. The military doesn't protect people like me. They use us and then move on. Maybe. But that general looked at you like you were the only person in that room he could trust. Before Cassidy could respond, the break room door opened. A woman in a crisp gray suit stepped inside. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that missed nothing. She had federal agent written all over her. Cassidy Brennan? Cassidy stood slowly. Yes. The woman held up credentials. Special Agent Lauren Vega, FBI. I need to ask you some questions about the patient you treated tonight. Rita started to stand. She's already been debriefed by... This is a separate matter, Agent Vega said, her tone polite but firm. Ms. Brennan, is there somewhere private we can talk? Cassidy glanced at Rita, then nodded. Conference room down the hall. They walked in silence. Cassidy could feel eyes tracking her from every direction. The night shift staff had clearly heard what happened, and now rumors were spreading like wildfire. The conference room was empty and cold. Agent Vega closed the door and pulled out a digital recorder. This is just a preliminary interview, she said. Nothing formal yet, but I need to understand the timeline of events from the moment the patient arrived. Cassidy walked her through it. The ambulance arrival, the triage assessment, Palmer's decision to send him for imaging, the code in the CT scanner, the argument in the trauma bay, the Reboa insertion. Agent Vega listened without interrupting, taking notes on a tablet. When Cassidy finished, the agent looked up. You mentioned that Dr. Palmer ignored your recommendation for immediate surgery. Why do you think he made that call? Cassidy chose her words carefully. He's a second-year resident. He wanted imaging to confirm the diagnosis before proceeding. But you disagreed. Yes. Based on what? Experience. Agent Vega tilted her head slightly. Experience treating pelvic trauma in combat zones? Yes. How many times would you estimate you've seen injuries like Colonel Ashford's? Cassidy thought about it. 15, maybe 20 IEDs cause similar crush injuries. And how many of those patients survived? All of them. Agent Vega's eyebrows rose. All of them? The ones who made it to me alive, Cassidy clarified. Once they were in my hands, I didn't lose them. The agent studied her for a long moment. That's an impressive record. Cassidy said nothing. Agent Vega tapped her tablet screen. I've reviewed your military file. Bronze Star with Valor device. 3 letters of commendation. Qualified in advanced trauma life support, tactical combat casualty care, and forward surgical team operations. She looked up. Why did you leave? I served my time. Most people with your skill set re-enlist or go contractor. Those jobs pay 6 figures. I didn't join for money? Then why did you join? Cassidy's expression hardened. Is that relevant to your investigation? Agent Vega held her gaze, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. She closed the tablet. One more question. When you examined Colonel Ashford, did you notice anything unusual? Anything that suggested his injuries weren't consistent with a traffic accident? Cassidy frowned. Like what? You tell me. You've seen enough trauma to know the difference between accident patterns and deliberate harm. Cassidy thought back to those frantic minutes in the trauma bay. His pelvic fracture was severe but localized, consistent with a lateral compression injury, something heavy hitting him from the side. She paused. But there were no other significant external injuries. No head trauma, no chest wall damage, no defensive wounds. For a multi-vehicle pileup, that's unusual. Why? Because in a chain reaction accident, you'd expect more distributed trauma. He should have been banged up all over. Airbag burns, dashboard impact, whiplash at minimum. But his injuries were focused on the pelvis and lower abdomen. Cassidy met Agent Vega's eyes. It's more consistent with a targeted strike. The agent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Targeted how? Something that crushed his vehicle from the side. Precisely. Not random impact from other cars spinning out. Agent Vega was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up. Thank you, Ms. Brennan. That's very helpful. What's this really about? The agent paused at the door. The accident on I-71 wasn't an accident. Someone engineered that pileup to kill Colonel Ashford. They knew his route, they knew his timeline, and they knew exactly where to hit him. She looked back at Cassidy. If you hadn't been here tonight, they would have succeeded. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Agent Vega opened the door. You'll be contacted about additional interviews. In the meantime, don't discuss this with anyone outside official channels. Then she was gone. Cassidy stood alone in the empty conference room, her mind racing. Someone had tried to kill a military intelligence officer on American soil, and she'd accidentally gotten in their way. The door opened again. This time it was Rita, her face tight with worry. Holloway wants to see you in his office. Now. Cassidy's stomach sank. Here we go. They walked through the emergency department together. The overnight shift was in full swing now. New patients, new crises, the normal chaos of a busy urban hospital. But everywhere Cassidy looked, staff members stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Some faces showed respect. Others showed fear. Most just looked confused. Dr. Holloway's office was on the administrative wing, away from the noise and blood of the ER. The door was closed. Rita squeezed Cassidy's shoulder once, then walked away. Cassidy knocked. Come in. She opened the door. Dr. Marcus Holloway sat behind his desk, his face drawn and exhausted. He'd changed out of his surgical scrubs into street clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt that made him look older and more human than usual. For the first time since Cassidy had met him, he didn't look like a man in complete control. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Cassidy sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Holloway leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. I don't even know where to start with tonight. Cassidy waited. Dr. Palmer filed a formal complaint alleging that you physically assaulted him, ignored his direct orders, and performed an unauthorized medical procedure without consent or supervision. Holloway looked at her. Security has witness statements confirming all of it. I know. You could lose your license. You could face criminal charges. You could... He stopped himself. Do you understand the position you've put me in? Cassidy's voice came out quiet and even. Do you understand that Colonel Ashford would be dead right now if I'd followed protocol? Holloway's jaw tightened. That's not the point. That's exactly the point. No, Brennan. The point is that we have rules and procedures for a reason. You can't just decide to ignore them whenever you feel like it. Even when following them kills people? Holloway slammed his hand on the desk. Don't you dare lecture me about patient outcomes. I've been practicing medicine for 20 years. Then start acting like it. The words came out before Cassidy could stop them. Holloway went very still. What did you just say? Cassidy leaned forward. You heard me. You've spent 6 months undermining me, humiliating me, and blocking me from doing my job because you felt threatened by a nurse who actually knows what she's doing. You signed off on bad calls because you were too proud to listen. You let James Hendricks die because you couldn't admit that someone lower in the hierarchy might be right. Her voice stayed level but cold. Her voice. So don't sit there and tell me about rules and procedures when you've been breaking the most important rule of all. Do no harm. Holloway's face turned red. Get out. Gladly. Cassidy stood up and headed for the door. You're suspended pending investigation, Holloway said behind her. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. Cassidy stopped with her hand on the doorknob. She turned back slowly. You know what's funny? I came to this hospital because I thought civilian medicine would be easier. Less pressure, fewer life or death moments, a chance to help people without watching them die in my hands. She met his eyes. But you've made this place more toxic than a combat zone. At least in Afghanistan, people had the decency to be honest about wanting to kill you. She opened the door. Brennan. She paused. Holloway's voice was quieter now, almost uncertain. That procedure you performed tonight, the REBOA insertion, where did you learn that? Cassidy looked back at him. Watching people die when I didn't know how to save them. Then she walked out and closed the door behind her. 2 security guards were waiting in the hallway. They escorted her back to the emergency department in silence. Staff members watched as she collected her bag from her locker. Rita appeared with tears in her eyes. This is bullshit, she whispered. It's politics. It's cowardice. Cassidy pulled her jacket on. Take care of the patients, Rita. That's all that matters. She walked out through the ambulance bay, the same way she'd entered her first day. The October wind was sharp and cold. Dawn was still hours away. Columbus spread out below the hospital in a grid of orange streetlights and dark buildings. Cassidy sat in her car for a long time, her hands on the steering wheel, her mind replaying the night over and over. She'd saved a life, and lost everything else. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Car will pick you up at 0600 tomorrow. 2847 Riverside Drive, apartment 4B. Be ready. General Carr Cassidy stared at the message. She'd been suspended from her job. She'd assaulted a doctor. She'd violated hospital protocol. But the Army still wanted her. She started the car and drove home through empty streets, her thoughts spinning. By the time she reached her apartment, exhaustion had soaked into her bones. She stripped off her scrubs and stood in the shower until the water ran cold, washing away the blood and the fear and the rage. When she finally climbed into bed, sleep wouldn't come. She kept seeing Colonel Ashford's face, pale and unconscious. She kept hearing the flatline alarm. She kept feeling that moment when her hands had moved on instinct, muscle memory taking over, years of training compressed into seconds of absolute clarity. That was the feeling she'd been missing. Purpose. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from Rita. Holloway just got called into an emergency board meeting. Something's happening. Cassidy frowned and typed back. What kind of something? Don't know. But hospital admin is in full panic mode, lawyers everywhere. Cassidy set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Federal agents, Pentagon debriefs, emergency board meetings. Tonight had set something in motion that was bigger than a suspended nurse and a bruised doctor's ego. She just didn't know what yet. Sleep finally came around 4 a.m, heavy and dreamless. 2 hours later, her alarm jolted her awake. She dressed in clean clothes, jeans, a gray sweater, her old combat boots. She braided her hair back tight and checked her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired but steady. At exactly 6 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up outside her apartment building. Cassidy grabbed her jacket and walked outside. The driver was a young soldier in army dress uniform. He opened the rear door without a word. Cassidy climbed inside. The drive to Walter Reed took 4 hours. They stopped once for gas and coffee, but otherwise moved in silence. Cassidy watched the countryside roll past. Virginia forest turning gold and red in autumn light. Small towns that looked like movie sets. Highway signs pointing toward Washington. They arrived at the medical center just before 10 o'clock. Walter Reed was enormous, a sprawling complex of modern buildings and security checkpoints. The driver showed credentials at 3 different gates before finally pulling up to a nondescript administrative building. General Carr was waiting outside, still in uniform, looking like he hadn't slept. He opened Cassidy's door himself. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" The general almost smiled. "Not really." He led her inside and through a maze of corridors. Soldiers and medical staff moved past with practiced efficiency. Everything was clean, organized, and intimidating. They entered a secure briefing room. 3 other people were already inside. The captain from last night's medevac, Agent Vega, and a man in a suit who introduced himself as Deputy Director Carson from the DoD Inspector General's office. General Carr closed the door. "Ms. Brennan, what we're about to discuss is classified. You'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement before we proceed." He slid a document across the table. Cassidy read it quickly. Standard NDA language, penalties for disclosure, ongoing security obligations, acknowledgement of federal jurisdiction. She signed it. Deputy Director Carson opened a folder and pulled out several photographs. He laid them on the table in front of Cassidy. "Do you recognize this man?" The photo showed Colonel Ashford in dress uniform, younger and healthier. "That's the patient from last night, Colonel Nathan Ashford, Defense Intelligence Agency. He was returning from a classified meeting in Cleveland when his convoy was attacked." Carson pulled out another photo. Wreckage from the highway pileup. Someone used a stolen dump truck to engineer a multi-vehicle collision at a specific location on I-71. 14 other people were injured. 2 died. But the target was always Colonel Ashford. Cassidy studied the photos. Why? Because he was carrying intelligence about a security breach at Fort Meade. Someone inside our own defense infrastructure has been leaking operational data to foreign actors. Colonel Ashford had identified the source. He was on his way to present evidence when the attack happened. The weight of those words settled over the room. Agent Vega leaned forward. "We believe the leak is someone with access to military medical records and personnel files. Someone who would know when and where the colonel was traveling." Cassidy's stomach dropped. "You think the leak is at Mercy Ridge?" "We think it's possible," Carson said carefully. "The timing is too precise. The attack happened less than 6 miles from your hospital, and the decision to route the colonel there instead of a larger trauma center was made by someone monitoring emergency scanner traffic." General Carr spoke quietly. "If you hadn't been there last night, the colonel would have died before we could extract him, and the investigation would have died with him." Cassidy looked at each of them in turn. "What do you need from me?" Carson pulled out another document. "Your suspension from Mercy Ridge gives us an opportunity. We want you to go back as a consultant, officially reviewing trauma protocols following last night's incident. Unofficially, you'll be helping us identify who has access to the systems we believe were compromised. You want me to spy on my own hospital. We want you to help us catch a traitor who's responsible for multiple deaths and ongoing threats to national security." Cassidy sat back, her mind racing. "What if I say no?" "Then we pursue other avenues," Carson said. "But it will take longer, and more people may die." General Carr caught her eye. "I wouldn't ask this if I didn't think you were the right person, Brennan. You have the medical knowledge, the security background, and the access. And after last night, you have something else." "What's that?" "Everyone at that hospital underestimated you once. They won't make that mistake again, which means they'll be watching you. And people who are being watched make mistakes." Cassidy looked down at the photos on the table. Colonel Ashford, the wreckage, the body bags. All because someone had decided their paycheck was worth more than lives. She'd spent 6 months being treated like she didn't matter. Now they wanted her to go back and prove them all wrong. "When do I start?" Carson smiled slightly. Hospital administration is expecting you tomorrow morning at 0800. Your suspension has been lifted pending federal review. Dr. Holloway will be informed that you're operating under DOD oversight. He's going to love that. He doesn't have to love it, General Carr said. He just has to stay out of your way. They spent the next 2 hours going over protocols, communication procedures, and threat indicators. Agent Vega gave Cassidy a secure phone. Carson provided a list of personnel to observe. General Carr walked her through what Colonel Ashford had been investigating before the attack. By the time they finished, Cassidy's head was spinning. The driver took her back to Columbus in silence. She sat in the back seat watching the landscape scroll past, thinking about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. She'd saved a life, lost her job, gained it back, and now she was working for federal investigators hunting a traitor in her own hospital. The soldier who'd left the military to escape the weight of life-and-death decisions had just been pulled right back in. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rita. Emergency staff meeting tomorrow morning. Mandatory attendance. Holloway looks like he's about to have a stroke. Cassidy smiled grimly. I'll be there. The driver dropped her off just after sunset. She climbed the stairs to her apartment slowly, exhaustion dragging at every step. Inside, she dropped her bag and collapsed onto the couch. Her secure phone buzzed. A message from an encrypted number. Colonel Ashford stabilized post-surgery. Prognosis good. You saved his life. V. Agent Vega. Cassidy stared at the message for a long time. Then another text came through. This one from an unknown number with a Columbus area code. I know what you did, and I know who you really are. Stay out of this or you'll regret it. Cassidy's blood went cold. She screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Agent Vega immediately. The response came back within seconds. Don't reply. Don't delete. We're tracing it now. Stay alert. Cassidy locked her apartment door and checked every window. Someone at Mercy Ridge knew she was more than just a nurse, and now they knew she was a threat. She didn't sleep that night. Cassidy sat on her couch with every light in the apartment blazing, the secure phone within arm's reach, and her old service knife from Afghanistan lying on the coffee table. The threat message glowed on her regular phone screen like a curse. I know what you did, and I know who you really are. Someone at Mercy Ridge had been watching her long before tonight. Someone who knew she wasn't just another nurse. Someone who understood that she'd just become a problem. Her phone buzzed at 3 a.m. Agent Vega. Trace came back to a burner phone. Activated yesterday, used once, already destroyed. Whoever sent it knows tradecraft. Cassidy typed back with numb fingers. So we have nothing. We have confirmation that someone's rattled. That's something. Stay sharp tomorrow. Dawn came too fast. Cassidy showered, dressed in clean scrubs, and drove to Mercy Ridge through morning traffic that felt surreal in its normalcy. Soccer moms in minivans, commuters sipping coffee. The world moving forward like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She parked in the staff lot and sat in her car for 5 minutes, studying the building. The emergency department looked exactly the same. Same concrete facade, same ambulance bay, same glass doors she'd walked through 100 times. Except now she was walking in as bait. Rita was waiting just inside the entrance, her face pale and worried. Thank God, she breathed. I thought they'd actually keep you out. Change of plans. What kind of change? Cassidy glanced around. Staff members were streaming past toward the conference room on the second floor. Later, what's this meeting about? Holloway called it an hour ago. Mandatory for all ER staff. Rita's voice dropped. Security's been in his office all morning. Something big is happening. They joined the flow of people heading upstairs. Cassidy could feel eyes on her from every direction. Nurses whispering, residents staring, attending physicians looking anywhere but at her face. The woman who'd been invisible for 6 months was suddenly the only person anyone could see. The conference room was packed. Every chair filled, people standing along the walls. Dr. Holloway stood at the front beside 2 men in hospital administration suits and a woman Cassidy recognized as the legal counsel. Palmer sat in the front row, looking like he'd been awake for 3 days straight. Holloway's eyes found Cassidy the moment she entered. Something flickered across his face. Anger, fear, maybe both, before he turned away. Everyone's here, one of the administrators said quietly. Holloway cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on short notice. We need to address what happened 2 nights ago in Trauma Bay 1. He paused, visibly uncomfortable. As you're all aware, there was an incident involving an unauthorized medical procedure performed by Nurse Cassidy Brennan during a mass casualty event. The room went silent. Dr. Palmer filed a formal complaint alleging assault in violation of medical protocol. Security documented multiple witness statements confirming that Nurse Brennan physically pushed Dr. Palmer and proceeded with emergency intervention against his explicit orders. Palmer sat up straighter, vindication written across his face. However, Holloway continued, and his voice went tight, we have been informed by federal authorities that the patient in question was a classified military asset whose survival was critical to an ongoing national security investigation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Furthermore, military medical consultants have reviewed Nurse Brennan's intervention and determined that her actions were consistent with advanced battlefield trauma protocols and directly responsible for preserving the patient's life. Holloway looked like he was chewing glass. As a result, the hospital administration has decided not to pursue disciplinary action at this time. Palmer shot to his feet. That's insane! She assaulted me! The legal counsel stepped forward. Dr. Palmer, this decision comes from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. Mercy Ridge Medical Center is not in a position to override federal authority. So she just gets away with it? Holloway's face darkened. Sit down, doctor. No, I'm not going to... Sit down. The command in Holloway's voice was absolute. Palmer sat, his face red with rage. The administrator took over. Effective immediately, Nurse Brennan will be serving as a consultant on trauma response protocols while federal investigators complete their review of the mass casualty incident. She will have full access to departmental records and the authority to observe all emergency procedures. He looked directly at Cassidy. Ms. Brennan, you'll report directly to me and to the external review team. Is that understood? Cassidy nodded. Yes, sir. Good. Everyone else, this situation is now part of an active federal investigation. You're not to discuss it outside official channels. Any questions about the incident should be directed to legal counsel. He closed his folder with a snap. That's all. Back to work. The room erupted in whispers the moment he finished. Staff members filed out in clusters, shooting glances at Cassidy like she'd grown horns. Palmer stormed past without making eye contact. Holloway remained at the front, speaking quietly with the legal team. Rita grabbed Cassidy's arm and pulled her into an empty hallway. What the hell just happened? I got drafted. Into what? Cassidy glanced around to make sure they were alone. I can't talk about it. Not yet. Rita's eyes widened. Oh my God. You're working with them. The feds. Rita, that's why they dropped everything. That's why Holloway looks like he swallowed a grenade. You're not a consultant, you're an operative. Keep your voice down. Rita stepped closer, her voice urgent. Cassidy, what did you get yourself into? Nothing I didn't choose. That's not an answer. Cassidy met her eyes. Someone at this hospital tried to kill that patient. Someone with access to military intelligence and federal systems, and they threatened me last night. She pulled out her phone and showed Rita the message. Rita's face went pale. Jesus Christ. So yeah, I'm working with the feds because whoever's leaking information is still here, still watching, and if we don't stop them, more people are going to die. Rita stared at her for a long moment. Then she pulled Cassidy into a tight hug. You're either the bravest person I know or the stupidest. Probably both. Rita pulled back, her expression fierce. What do you need? Eyes and ears. If you see anything strange, anyone acting nervous, accessing files they shouldn't, asking questions about that night, tell me immediately. You think it's someone we know? I think it's someone with clearance to hospital systems and knowledge of emergency protocols. That's a short list. Rita's jaw tightened. I'll watch. They separated. Cassidy spent the rest of the morning in the administrative wing reviewing trauma logs and patient records. Deputy Director Carson had given her a list of 23 staff members with the necessary access levels: doctors, nurses, IT administrators, security personnel. Her job was to find patterns, anomalies, anything that didn't fit. It was tedious work made worse by the fact that she could feel people watching her through every glass wall and open doorway. Around noon, her secure phone vibrated. A text from Agent Vega. Colonel Ashford regained consciousness. Asking to speak with you. Cassidy's heart jumped. When? Now, if possible, we can arrange secure video call. Cassidy glanced around the empty office she'd been assigned. No windows, thick walls, door that locked from the inside. Send the link. The call connected 90 seconds later. Colonel Nathan Ashford appeared on screen looking haggard but alive. He was sitting up in a hospital bed, IV lines running from both arms, monitors beeping quietly in the background. His face was pale and drawn, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "Ms. Brennan," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Colonel, how are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a dump truck." He managed a thin smile. "Because I did. The surgeon said you'll make a full recovery. They also said I'd be dead if you hadn't stuck a balloon in my aorta." He studied her face through the camera. "General Carr told me about your background. Ranger Medevac in Kandahar." "Yes, sir." "Then you know what it means when someone saves your life under fire." Cassidy didn't know how to respond to that. Ashford's expression grew serious. "I need to tell you something. Something I couldn't tell the investigators because I don't know who to trust anymore." He paused. "The person who tried to kill me isn't just leaking intelligence. They're part of a network that's been compromising military medical facilities across 3 states. They use hospital systems to track high-value targets, coordinate attacks, and cover their tracks." Cassidy's blood went cold. "How long has this been happening?" "At least 2 years, maybe longer. We only caught it because a logistics officer noticed discrepancies in medevac routing data." Ashford leaned forward slightly, wincing. "The person at your hospital isn't just an informant. They're a node in a larger operation, and now that you've exposed yourself, they know you're a threat." So that message wasn't just intimidation. No, it was reconnaissance. They're trying to figure out what you know and who you're working with. He met her eyes. "You need to be careful, Ms. Brennan. These people don't make threats they don't intend to follow through on." "Then why warn me at all? Why not just act?" "Because killing a federal consultant under DoD protection would bring down heat they can't afford. The message was meant to make you back off voluntarily." He paused. "But if you don't back off, they'll find another way." Cassidy thought about her apartment, her car, the route she took to work every morning. "What do you want me to do?" "Find them before they disappear. The moment they realize the investigation is closing in, they'll burn their bridges and vanish, and the network will just recruit someone else." "Do you have any idea who it might be?" Ashford hesitated. "I have a name, but I don't have proof. And without proof, we can't move." He glanced off camera at something. "Agent Vega has the details. She'll brief you after this call." "Colonel, thank you, Ms. Brennan, for keeping me alive long enough to finish this." His voice was quiet but intense. "Now go finish it." The call disconnected. Cassidy sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing. Then her regular phone rang. Holloway's extension. She answered. "Brennan? My office. Now." The line went dead. Cassidy locked the secure phone in her bag and headed downstairs. Holloway's office door was closed. She knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Holloway sat behind his desk looking 10 years older than he had that morning. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Close the door," he said quietly. Cassidy closed it. "I want to know what's really going on," Holloway said. "And don't give me that consultant bullshit. The feds don't send investigators for protocol reviews." Cassidy stayed standing. "I can't discuss an ongoing investigation. This is my department, my hospital. I have a right to... You have a right to stay out of the way." Holloway's hands clenched on the desk. "For 6 months, I've run this emergency department. I've made the calls. I've taken the responsibility. I've dealt with the consequences. And now you waltz in here with federal backing and suddenly I'm supposed to just accept that? You should have accepted my medical judgment when it mattered. One case, Brennan. One patient. That doesn't erase 6 months of..." "James Hendricks," Cassidy interrupted. "Margaret Foster. David Kim. Ramon Juarez. Should I keep going?" Holloway went pale. "What are you talking about? 4 patients you misdiagnosed or mistreated because you were too proud to listen to staff members who saw what you missed." Cassidy's voice stayed level, but cold. "Hendricks died. Foster lost kidney function. Kim had permanent nerve damage. Juarez developed sepsis from a missed infection. All preventable, all documented in incident reports you signed off on without investigation. Those were complex cases with..." Those were ego cases where you valued your authority over patient outcomes. Holloway stood up, his face red. You have no idea what it takes to run a department like this. The pressure, the impossible decisions, I've made life and death decisions while mortars were falling, Cassidy said flatly. Don't lecture me about pressure. They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Holloway sat back down. What do you want from me? I want you to do your job. Take care of patients, run your department, and stay out of my investigation. And if I don't? Cassidy leaned forward, her voice dropping. Then I'll make sure every medical board in Ohio knows about the patients you've harmed through negligence and pride. Federal investigators love paper trails, Doctor, and you've left a long one. Holloway's face went from red to white. You're threatening me. I'm giving you a choice. Work with me or get buried by your own mistakes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Holloway's shoulders sagged. What do you need? Access to the staff scheduling system for the past 3 months, and personnel files for anyone who worked the night Colonel Ashford arrived. That's confidential information. Not anymore. DoD authorization supersedes hospital privacy policy. Holloway opened his computer and typed with sharp, angry keystrokes. A minute later, Cassidy's phone buzzed with an access notification. There. You have what you wanted. Cassidy turned to leave. Brennan. She paused at the door. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, Holloway said quietly. I was just trying to maintain order. Order without competence is just control, Cassidy said, and control without accountability is tyranny. She left him sitting in his office, looking smaller and older than she'd ever seen him. The rest of the day passed in a blur of data review and quiet observation. Cassidy moved through the emergency department like a ghost, watching staff interactions, noting who talked to whom, tracking patterns in shift changes and patient assignments. By evening, she'd narrowed the suspect list to 7 people. 3 nurses with system access and military backgrounds, 2 residents who'd rotated through multiple trauma centers, 1 IT administrator with unrestricted network privileges, and 1 security supervisor who'd been working at Mercy Ridge for 12 years. She was uploading her findings to the secure server when Rita appeared at her door, her face tight with worry. We have a problem. Cassidy looked up. What kind? Palmer's been asking questions about you, about the federal investigation, about Colonel Ashford. Rita's voice was low and urgent. He cornered one of the OR nurses and tried to get her to tell him what happened during the surgery. When she refused, he threatened to report her for protocol violations. Where is he now? Residence lounge, I think, but Cassidy... Rita hesitated. He's scared, really scared, and scared people do stupid things. Cassidy grabbed her phone and headed for the residence lounge. She found Palmer sitting alone, staring at his phone with hollow eyes. He looked up when she entered. Come to gloat? He said bitterly. Come to talk. I don't have anything to say to you. Cassidy sat down across from him. Then listen. You made a bad call the other night. It happens. But instead of learning from it, you're trying to deflect blame and dig up dirt to protect yourself. I followed protocol, Palmer said defensively. Everything I did was by the book. The book says to stabilize critical patients, not send them for imaging when they're actively bleeding out. I needed confirmation before. You needed to trust your instincts, but you don't have any yet because you've spent more time kissing Holloway's ass than actually learning medicine. Palmer's face flushed. You don't know anything about... I know that every minute you spent arguing with me was a minute that patient was dying. I know that your ego almost cost him his life. And I know that you're more worried about your career than you are about the fact that you nearly killed someone. Palmer looked away. What do you want from me? I want you to stop asking questions about things that don't concern you. The federal investigation has nothing to do with your complaint or your career. It's about national security. And if you keep poking around, you're going to get hurt. Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who's seen what happens when civilians stumble into military operations. Cassidy leaned forward. Go home, Palmer. Rest. Come back tomorrow and focus on being a better doctor, because right now you're in way over your head. She stood up and walked out, leaving him sitting in the empty lounge. Her phone buzzed as she reached the parking lot. Agent Vega, we have movement. One of your suspects just accessed Colonel Ashford's medical records from an off-site terminal. We're tracing the location now. Cassidy's heart rate spiked. Which suspect? Security supervisor. Michael Torres. 12-year employee, clean record, military background, Marine Corps intelligence specialist. Ring any bells? Cassidy pulled up Torres's file on her phone as she walked to her car. 43 years old, honorable discharge in 2012, hired at Mercy Ridge 6 months later. Perfect attendance, multiple commendations, promoted to night shift supervisor in 2019, and absolutely nothing suspicious in his entire employment record, which was exactly what made him perfect. Where's the terminal location? Coffee shop in Westerville. 12 miles from the hospital. Local PD is moving in now. Cassidy started her car. I'm going there. Negative. Stay at the hospital. If Torres is our target, he may have backup. We don't want to spook them. Cassidy ignored the message and pulled out of the parking lot. If Torres was the leak, he'd been operating under their noses for years. He knew hospital security inside and out. He had access to every system, every camera, every entry point. And if he was accessing Ashford's records now, it meant he was either desperate or making a move. Either way, this was ending tonight. She drove through Columbus as the sun set, turning the city gold and orange. The secure phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Agent Vega ordering her to stand down. Cassidy turned it off. The coffee shop was in a strip mall near the highway, a generic chain location with floor-to-ceiling windows and scattered customers working on laptops. 2 Columbus PD cruisers were parked across the street, trying to look casual. Cassidy parked 3 spaces down and watched. Through the window, she could see a man sitting alone at a corner table, his back to the wall, a laptop open in front of him. Even from this distance, she recognized Michael Torres from his employee photo. Stocky build, dark hair going gray, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. He wasn't moving, just sitting there staring at the screen. Cassidy's instinct screamed warning. She pulled out her regular phone and called Agent Vega. I told you to stay put. It's a trap, Cassidy interrupted. Torres is just sitting there, not typing, not moving. He wants you to come in. How do you know? Because I've seen this play before. He's bait. The real target is whoever tries to arrest him. Vega was quiet for a second. Stand by. Through the window, Cassidy watched Torres slowly close his laptop. Then he stood up, left cash on the table, and walked calmly toward the exit. The moment he stepped outside, 3 things happened simultaneously. The Columbus PD officers moved to intercept him. A black SUV screeched into the parking lot from the opposite direction, and Torres pulled a handgun from his jacket. Cassidy was out of her car before conscious thought took over, moving on pure combat instinct. Gun! She shouted. The officers drew their weapons. Torres fired twice, not at them, but at the approaching SUV. The windshield shattered. The vehicle swerved wildly and crashed into a parked sedan. People inside the coffee shop screamed and dropped to the floor. Torres ran toward the highway access road, moving fast for a man his age. One officer pursued on foot. The other called for backup. Cassidy ran after them. Her body remembered this. The sprint, the adrenaline, the tunnel vision that came with chase mode. She'd run after wounded soldiers through hostile territory. She'd pulled patients from burning vehicles. She'd moved through chaos so many times that it felt more natural than peace. Torres vaulted a low fence and cut across a gas station parking lot. The pursuing officer was younger and faster, closing the distance. Then Torres spun and fired again. The officer went down, clutching his shoulder. Cassidy kept running. Torres saw her coming, and his eyes widened in recognition. "Stop!" he shouted. "Don't!" She tackled him from the side, using her full body weight to drive him into the pavement. His gun skittered across the asphalt. They hit the ground hard, the impact jarring her ribs, but she didn't let go. Torres thrashed, trying to throw her off. Cassidy drove her elbow into his kidney, then grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back with the joint lock she'd learned in combat training. "Don't move," she growled. Torres went still, breathing hard. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "You have no idea what you're doing," Torres gasped. "I know exactly what I'm doing. They're going to kill you, you and everyone helping you." "Who's they?" Torres actually laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "You think I'm the leak? I'm just the cleanup crew. The real operation is so far above your clearance you wouldn't believe it if I told you." Cassidy tightened her grip. "Try me." Colonel Ashford found the tip of the iceberg. But the whole thing goes deeper than anyone knows. Medical facilities, supply chains, personnel records, it's all compromised. And the people running it don't care about your federal investigation. Torres turned his head slightly, his voice dropping. They care about silencing anyone who gets close. Like you? Like all of us. Police cars flooded the parking lot, officers swarming with weapons drawn. Someone pulled Cassidy off Torres and zip-tied his wrists behind his back. Medics rushed to the wounded officer. Agent Vega appeared through the chaos, her face furious. "What the hell were you thinking?" Cassidy stood up slowly, her ribs screaming. "He was getting away. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Vega looked like she wanted to argue, then shook her head in frustration. "Get in the car. We need to debrief." They drove back to Mercy Ridge in tense silence. By the time they arrived, night had fallen completely, and the hospital glowed like a fortress against the dark sky. Vega's phone rang constantly, updates from the scene, reports from forensics, coordination with DOD investigators. Torres was being transported to a federal holding facility. The wounded officer was stable. The crashed SUV was registered to a shell company with connections to 3 other suspicious entities. The pieces were falling into place. But Torres's words kept echoing in Cassidy's mind. "The real operation is so far above your clearance you wouldn't believe it." They parked in the staff lot. Vega turned off the engine and looked at Cassidy. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "I've heard that before. Torres is going to lawyer up the second we start interrogation. But we have enough to hold him, and forensic accounting is tearing apart his finances right now." Vega paused. "You did good work today, Brennan. Reckless, but good." "Is it over?" Vega's expression darkened. "Torres said something about cleanup crew. That means there's more to this than one compromised security supervisor. We need to—" Her phone rang again. She answered, listened for 10 seconds, and her face went pale. "When?" she said sharply. "How many?" Another pause. "Lock down the building. Nobody in or out." She hung up and looked at Cassidy. "Someone just tried to access Colonel Ashford's current location at Walter Reed using Mercy Ridge's network 30 seconds ago, from inside this hospital." Cassidy's stomach dropped. Torres wasn't the leak. No, he was the distraction. Vega was already moving, pulling her weapon and calling for backup. Whoever tried to access those files is still here, right now. They ran for the entrance. Inside, the emergency department was in normal evening chaos. Patients waiting, staff moving between rooms, the usual controlled disorder. Everything looked completely normal, which meant the threat was invisible. Vega grabbed the first security guard she saw. "Lock all exits. Nobody leaves without ID verification." The guard looked confused. "Ma'am, I can't just—" Vega flashed her FBI credentials. "Federal emergency. Do it now." The guard got on his radio. Cassidy pulled out her phone and checked the suspect list. 6 names left after eliminating Torres. 3 nurses, 2 residents, 1 IT administrator. Any of them could be the real leak. Any of them could be here right now, trying to finish what Torres couldn't. Her phone buzzed. An alert from the secure server. Someone was accessing her investigation files. From inside the building. From the administrative wing where she'd been working all day. Cassidy's blood went cold. "They're in my office," she said. Vega turned. "Show me." They moved through the emergency department at a run, past startled staff and confused patients. Up the stairs to the administrative wing. Down the hallway toward the office Cassidy had been using. The door was closed. Light showed under the gap at the bottom. Vega drew her weapon and positioned herself at the doorframe. She looked at Cassidy and mouthed, "Stay back." Then she kicked the door open and went in fast, weapon up. "FBI, hands where I can see them." Cassidy followed her through the doorway. The office was empty, but her laptop was open on the desk, files scrolling across the screen as someone remotely accessed the system, and pinned to the monitor with a surgical scalpel was a handwritten note. Vega approached carefully and read it aloud. "You should have stayed quiet, Sergeant Brennan. Now everyone you care about is a target." Below the words was a photograph of Rita, standing outside the emergency department entrance, taken less than an hour ago. Cassidy grabbed her phone and dialed Rita's number with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. "We need to find her," Cassidy said, her voice flat and cold. Right now. Agent Vega was already on her radio calling for hospital-wide security alerts and requesting additional agents from the Columbus field office. She turned to Cassidy while coordinating the response. Where would Rita be at this hour? End of shift change, either the nurse's station or the break room. They ran. The emergency department was busier than before. A car accident bringing in 3 patients simultaneously, families crowding the waiting area, the organized chaos that came with trauma. Cassidy scanned faces as they moved, looking for Rita's familiar features, her curly hair, her bright scrubs. Nothing. The nurse's station was staffed by 2 younger nurses Cassidy recognized but didn't know well. "Where's Rita Sandoval?" Cassidy demanded. One of them looked up, startled. "She left about 20 minutes ago, said she had a headache and was going home early." Cassidy's stomach dropped into freefall. Rita never left early, never complained about headaches, never abandoned her shift unless something was seriously wrong. Vega was already pulling up Rita's personnel file on her phone. Home address is 2847 Maple Grove, apartment 6C. That's 15 minutes from here. "Call our building security," Cassidy said. "Make sure someone checks on her." "Already doing it." They moved back toward the administrative wing while Vega coordinated. 2 FBI agents arrived through the main entrance, a man and woman in dark suits who moved with tactical precision. Vega briefed them in 30 seconds flat. "We have an active threat inside this facility targeting federal witnesses. Primary target is Rita Sandoval, emergency department nurse. Secondary target is Cassidy Brennan, federal consultant." She pulled up the suspect list. 6 possible hostiles still unaccounted for. "We locked down the building and searched floor by floor." The male agent nodded and started organizing the sweep with hospital security. Cassidy's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. "Brennan?" Silence. Then a voice. Distorted. Electronic. Completely unrecognizable. "Your friend is safe. For now." Cassidy's hand tightened on the phone. "Where is she?" "Somewhere you won't find her unless you do exactly what I say." Vega moved closer, trying to hear the conversation. "What do you want?" Cassidy asked. "Colonel Ashford had information that doesn't belong to him. Files he copied from classified servers. Physical copies hidden somewhere we haven't been able to locate." The voice was calm, almost pleasant. "You're going to get those files for us." "I don't have access to—" "The Colonel trusts you. He'll tell you where they are if you ask. You have 24 hours. And if I refuse? Then Rita Sandoval becomes another tragic casualty. Hospital staff under stress, working double shifts, mental health crisis leading to unfortunate decisions." The voice paused. "These things happen all the time. Nobody would question it." Cassidy felt rage building in her chest like pressure behind a dam. "You touch her, and you're not in a position to make threats, Sergeant. Get us those files or your friend dies. We'll contact you with instructions." The line went dead. Cassidy stood frozen, every muscle locked tight with the effort of not screaming. Vega grabbed her arm. "Did they have her," Cassidy said through clenched teeth. "And they want classified intel in exchange." "We can't negotiate with Ia." "I'm not negotiating, I'm finding her." Cassidy pulled away and headed for the exit. Vega followed, calling orders over her shoulder to the other agents. They reached the parking lot just as 2 black SUVs arrived. More federal agents, these ones wearing tactical gear and carrying assault rifles. Deputy Director Carson climbed out of the lead vehicle, his face grim. "Bring me up to speed." Vega did it in 60 seconds. Torres's arrest, the remote access attempt, the threat against Rita, the ransom demand. Carson listened without interrupting, then looked at Cassidy. "Did they give you a time frame?" 24 hours. "That's longer than they need. They're buying time for something else." "Or setting a trap," Vega added. "Both," Cassidy said. "Rita's the bait, I'm the target, and whatever files they want are the prize." Carson pulled out his phone and made a call. "Get me General Carr. Priority 1. He walked a few steps away for privacy. Cassidy stood in the cold October air, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them one after another. Rita was somewhere in Columbus, possibly drugged or restrained, definitely scared. The people holding her were professionals, military-trained, well-funded, connected enough to compromise federal systems, which meant they had resources Cassidy couldn't match. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd threatened someone she cared about, and that changed everything. Carson returned, his expression dark. General Carr confirms that Colonel Ashford did make physical copies of the intelligence files before the ambush. He hid them as insurance in case the digital evidence was destroyed. He paused. The general is willing to authorize their recovery if it means securing Miss Sandoval's safety. That's insane, Vega said. Those files contain active intelligence on— I know what they contain, Carson snapped, but we're not sacrificing a civilian to protect information that's already been compromised. He turned to Cassidy. Colonel Ashford will tell you where the files are hidden. You'll retrieve them and prepare for the exchange. But we'll have tactical teams in position to intercept the moment contact is made. They'll be watching for that, Cassidy said. I know, which is why you're going to make it look convincing. Over the next 3 hours, they built the operation. Cassidy drove to Walter Reed under federal escort. 2 agents in an unmarked sedan following at a discreet distance. She arrived just after midnight and was cleared through security with credentials that opened every door in the complex. Colonel Ashford was awake when she entered his room, sitting up in bed with a tablet in his lap. He looked stronger than during their video call, but still pale and drawn. Ms. Brennan, he said quietly, they briefed me on the situation. I need to know where the files are. Ashford studied her face for a moment. Before I tell you, I want you to understand what's in them. The people behind this network aren't just leaking intelligence. They're weaponizing medical infrastructure. Hospitals, medevac routes, patient databases, all of it turned into attack vectors. His voice was steady but intense. If these files disappear, we lose the only concrete evidence we have. The investigation dies and the network survives. I understand. Do you? Because the woman they're holding hostage is leverage, but you're the real target. The moment you hand over those files, they'll kill both of you to eliminate witnesses. Cassidy met his eyes. Then I'll have to make sure that doesn't happen. Ashford held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The files are hidden in a storage unit in Alexandria, Unit 847 at Secure Space Storage on Richmond Highway. The combination is 241836. Everything's in a lockbox inside. He paused. There are 3 physical drives and 2 folders of printed documents. Don't look at the contents. The less you know, the safer you are if things go wrong. Cassidy memorized the information. Thank you, Colonel. Bring your friend home, Sergeant, and burn these bastards to the ground while you're at it. The drive to Alexandria took 40 minutes through empty pre-dawn streets. The storage facility was a sprawling complex of identical beige buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras. Cassidy's escort waited in the parking lot while she went inside alone. Unit 847 was on the 2nd floor, accessible through an exterior stairwell. The combination lock opened smoothly. Inside, the 10x10 space was mostly empty except for a few cardboard boxes and a large military footlocker against the back wall. The lockbox was inside the footlocker, secured with a padlock that opened to the same combination. Cassidy lifted it out carefully. Inside were exactly what Ashford had described. 3 encrypted hard drives and 2 thick manila folders stuffed with documents. She didn't open them, didn't even look at the labels. Just closed the box and carried it back to the car. Agent Vega was waiting when Cassidy returned to Columbus, now operating out of a command post set up in a conference room at the FBI field office. Tactical maps covered one wall. Computer screens showed live feeds from various locations. A dozen agents worked phones and terminals with focused intensity. Carson looked up when Cassidy entered. You have them? She set the lockbox on the table. All of it. Good. Now we wait for contact. The call came 6 hours later, just after noon. Same distorted voice, same electronic calm. Do you have what we asked for? Yes. Good. There's an abandoned industrial park in the Hilltop neighborhood, 3500 West Broad Street. You know it? Cassidy pulled up a map on her phone. The location was on the western edge of Columbus, a decaying area of empty warehouses and overgrown lots. I can find it. Be there at 1600 hours. Come alone. Bring the files. If we detect any federal presence, your friend dies immediately. The voice paused. And Sergeant Brennan? Don't try to be a hero. You're good at keeping people alive. Let's see if you can manage it one more time. The line went dead. Carson was already pulling up aerial surveillance of the target location. It's perfect for them, Vega said, studying the images. Multiple access points, clear sight lines, lots of places to hide overwatch positions. And it's public enough that a major tactical response would be visible from half a mile away, Carson added. He looked at Cassidy. They've done this before. So what's the play? Cassidy asked. You go in wired and armed. We establish perimeter positions, but stay back far enough to avoid detection. The moment you confirm Rita's location and status, we move. They'll kill her the second they see you coming. Not if we're fast enough. Cassidy stared at the map, her mind working through scenarios and probabilities. Every tactical option had the same problem: timing. The bad guys would have Rita in a secure position. The moment Cassidy arrived, they'd verify the files were genuine. Then they'd have to decide whether to honor the exchange or eliminate both witnesses. Professional operators would choose elimination, which meant Cassidy had to find another way. She looked up at Carson. I need to do this without your tactical team. Absolutely not. They're watching for a federal response. That's what they're prepared for. But they're not prepared for me. Vega frowned. What are you talking about? I spent 3 years extracting wounded soldiers from hostile territory. Sometimes we had air support and backup. Sometimes we had nothing but our training and whatever we could carry. Cassidy's voice was calm and cold. These people think I'm just a nurse, a consultant, someone they can control with threats and leverage. They don't know what I really am. Carson studied her face. And what's that? Someone who doesn't leave people behind. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Carson nodded slowly. You'll still wear a wire, and we'll have sniper overwatch from concealed positions, but no tactical entry unless you signal emergency. How do I signal? Say the word protocol. Any context, any sentence. We hear that word. We come in hard. Cassidy checked her watch. 3 hours until the meet. She spent the time preparing, changing into dark, practical clothes, reviewing building layouts, memorizing entry and exit points. An FBI tech fitted her with a nearly invisible wire and gave her a small backup transmitter disguised as a car key. Vega pulled her aside just before she left. You don't have to do this alone. Yeah, I do. Why? Cassidy thought about Rita, her kindness, her loyalty, the way she'd stood by Cassidy when everyone else was ready to throw her away. Because she's my friend. And I don't sacrifice friends for strategy. She left before Vega could respond. The drive to West Broad Street took 20 minutes. Cassidy parked 3 blocks away from the target location and approached on foot, carrying the lockbox in a backpack. The industrial park was exactly as depressing as the aerial photos suggested. Crumbling warehouses with broken windows, cracked pavement overtaken by weeds, graffiti covering every available surface. Silent. Empty. Perfect for an ambush. Cassidy moved between buildings carefully, watching for movement, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Her phone buzzed at exactly 4 o'clock. New text from an unknown number. Building 7. Second floor. Northwest corner. She found the building, a 3-story concrete structure that might have been a factory once. The main entrance was a rusted metal door hanging half open. Cassidy stepped inside. The interior was dark and vast, lit only by afternoon sun filtering through broken windows. Industrial equipment lay abandoned and rusting, birds nested in the rafters. The air smelled like decay and old oil. A metal staircase led upward. Cassidy climbed it slowly, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. The second floor was smaller, divided into what used to be offices and storage rooms. She followed the wall to the northwest corner and found a door marked with fresh spray paint, a simple red X. She pushed it open. The room beyond was maybe 20 feet square with windows overlooking the rest of the industrial park. Rita sat tied to a chair in the center of the space, duct tape over her mouth, her eyes wide with fear and relief when she saw Cassidy. And standing behind her, holding a gun to Rita's head, was Dr. Palmer. Cassidy stopped in the doorway, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. Palmer looked nothing like the anxious, insecure resident she'd argued with days ago. His expression was calm and focused, professional. "Close the door," he said quietly. Cassidy closed it. "Put the backpack on the floor and step away from it." She did. Palmer kept the gun pressed against Rita's temple while he checked the backpack with his free hand. He pulled out the lockbox, opened it, verified the contents. Then he smiled. "You actually brought them. I wasn't sure you would." "Let her go," Cassidy said. "You have what you wanted." "Not yet." Palmer set the lockbox aside, his gun never wavering. First, you're going to tell me who else knows about these files. Just me and the federal team. And Colonel Ashford. He's under guard at Walter Reed. You can't touch him. Palmer's smile widened. We don't need to touch him. We just needed to flush out everyone connected to his investigation. Agent Vega, Deputy Director Carson, General Carr, all the key players are now exposed and documented. By this time tomorrow, they'll all have accidents. Car crashes, home invasions, sudden medical emergencies. He tilted his head slightly. You'd be surprised how easy it is to kill people when you control their medical records. Cassidy felt cold rage building in her chest. You were never just a resident, were you? I was recruited out of medical school, 6 years embedded at Mercy Ridge, gathering intelligence, identifying high-value targets, establishing access to trauma systems across 3 states. Palmer's voice was almost proud. The network needed someone with medical credentials and military understanding, someone who could move through hospitals without suspicion. Torres? Security was the easy part. He got us into the physical infrastructure, but the real value was medical access, patient records, treatment protocols, staff schedules, everything necessary to weaponize the entire healthcare system. Rita made a muffled sound behind the duct tape, her eyes blazing with fury. Palmer glanced at her. Your friend here figured it out 3 days ago. Noticed I was accessing files outside my authorization, started asking questions, so we had to take her off the board before she talked to the wrong people. She didn't tell anyone, Cassidy said, trying to keep her voice calm. I know. We've been monitoring all hospital communications since Colonel Ashford arrived. If she'd talked, she'd already be dead. Palmer's expression hardened. But now you're both liabilities that need to be eliminated. He shifted his aim from Rita to Cassidy. The official story will be a murder-suicide. Tragic case of PTSD, combat veteran unable to adjust to civilian life, snaps and kills a colleague before taking her own life. Medical examiner will find evidence of psychological instability. Everyone will understand. Cassidy didn't move. Except I'm not unstable. The autopsy report will say otherwise. We control the medical examiner's office, remember? And what happens when federal investigators tear apart that autopsy? By then, the trail will be cold, and the network will have moved on to new identities and new facilities. Palmer's finger tightened on the trigger. It's been interesting working with you, Brennan. You're everything they said you were. Skilled, dedicated, impossible to intimidate. But you made one critical mistake. What's that? You thought you were hunting us. You never considered that we were hunting you. Cassidy smiled coldly. Actually, I did. She said the word clearly and calmly. Protocol. Palmer's eyes widened a fraction of a second before the window behind him exploded. The sniper round hit him in the shoulder, spinning him away from Rita and sending his gun flying across the floor. He went down hard, screaming in pain and shock. Cassidy was moving before he hit the ground. She crossed the room in 3 strides, kicked Palmer's gun away, and dropped to her knees beside Rita. She ripped the duct tape off Rita's mouth and started working on the zip ties binding her wrists. Are you hurt? Cassidy asked urgently. No, Rita gasped. Just scared out of my mind. The door burst open. FBI tactical agents flooded inside with weapons raised, moving with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. 2 agents secured Palmer while he writhed on the floor clutching his shattered shoulder. 2 more swept the room for additional threats. Agent Vega entered last, her face tight with relief and residual adrenaline. You okay? We're fine, Cassidy said, helping Rita to her feet. Rita grabbed Cassidy in a fierce hug, her entire body shaking. I thought you were going to get yourself killed, she whispered. Not today. Palmer was screaming as the agents applied trauma dressings to his shoulder. I want a lawyer. I have rights. Carson entered the room, surveyed the scene with cold satisfaction, then looked down at Palmer. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. He turned to the tactical team leader. Get him to a federal medical facility under armed guard. And someone call Mercy Ridge. We need to secure the medical examiner's office immediately. The agents dragged Palmer out, still shouting threats and demands. Carson approached Cassidy and Rita. Mrs. Sandoval, we're going to need a full statement about your abduction. But first, let's get you checked out by paramedics. Rita nodded, still clutching Cassidy's arm. As they walked out of the building, Cassidy saw the scope of the federal response. 12 vehicles, 30 agents, sniper teams packing up from rooftop positions across the industrial park. The coordination must have been extraordinary to set up that fast without being detected. Vega fell into step beside Cassidy. You took a hell of a risk. It worked. This time, don't make it a habit. Cassidy almost smiled. They spent the next 4 hours at the FBI field office. Rita gave her statement while Cassidy provided tactical debriefing. By 10 o'clock that night, the investigation had cracked wide open. Palmer was singing under interrogation, giving up names and details in exchange for a reduced sentence. The network's reach was even more extensive than Colonel Ashford had documented. 17 medical facilities compromised, 43 personnel embedded across 3 states, ties to foreign intelligence services operating on American soil. It would take months to dismantle completely, but the core had been shattered. Carson called Cassidy into a private office around midnight. We've arrested 6 additional conspirators so far. FBI teams are executing warrants at Mercy Ridge right now. Medical records, personnel files, the medical examiner's office, like Palmer mentioned. He paused. This is going to be a massive scandal. Media coverage, congressional hearings, lawsuits. Mercy Ridge's reputation is going to take a serious hit. Good, Cassidy said flatly. Carson raised an eyebrow. You don't have any sympathy for the institution? The institution protected people like Holloway and Palmer while treating competent staff like disposable resources. Maybe a scandal is exactly what it needs. Carson was quiet for a moment. Then he slid a folder across the desk. The Department of Defense is grateful for your service on this operation. There's a commendation coming from the Inspector General's office, and General Carr wanted me to extend an invitation. For what? A position training trauma specialist for military medical units. It would be a civilian contractor role, but you'd have access to resources and authority that civilian hospitals can't match. Cassidy looked down at the folder without opening it. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Good people are hard to find. She left the FBI office just after 1 a.m. Rita was waiting in the lobby, her statement finally complete. They walked out to the parking lot together in exhausted silence. You want to get breakfast? Rita asked, because I don't think I can go home and sleep after everything that just happened. Yeah, breakfast sounds good. They found a 24-hour diner on the east side and ordered coffee and pancakes neither of them really wanted. They sat in a corner booth and didn't talk about Palmer or the network or any of it. They just sat together, 2 people who'd survived something terrible and were still trying to process what came next. Finally, Rita spoke. Are you going to take that DOD job? I don't know. You should. You're wasted at Mercy Ridge. Mercy Ridge is going to be a different place after this. Rita snorted. Only if they clean house properly, and hospitals don't usually do that. Cassidy took a sip of coffee. We'll see. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, except this time Cassidy recognized the pattern. Board meeting at Mercy Ridge, 800 tomorrow. Your presence is required. Hospital administration. She showed it to Rita. You think that's about the investigation? Rita asked. Or they're firing me for real this time. After you just exposed a massive spy network operating in their facility, they wouldn't dare. Cassidy wasn't so sure. She slept for 4 hours, showered, and drove to Mercy Ridge at dawn. The hospital looked the same as always, same concrete walls, same busy parking lot, same glass doors. But everything felt different. She walked through the emergency department and felt the weight of stares following her. Staff members who'd ignored her for months now stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Some faces showed respect, some showed fear, most showed confusion. The board meeting was in the main conference room on the executive floor. Cassidy had never been to this part of the hospital before. Plush carpeting, expensive furniture, the kind of place where decisions that affected thousands of lives got made behind closed doors. The conference room door was open. Inside, a dozen people sat around a massive wooden table, hospital board members, legal counsel, and administration executives. Dr. Holloway sat near the end, looking smaller and older than Cassidy had ever seen him. And at the head of the table sat General Carr in full dress uniform. Everyone looked up when Cassidy entered. Ms. Brennan, the board chairman said, gesturing to an empty chair. Please, sit. Cassidy sat. The chairman cleared his throat. We've been briefed by federal authorities on the scope of the security breach and the investigation that led to yesterday's arrests. We understand that your actions were instrumental in exposing the conspiracy and preventing further harm. Cassidy waited. However, we also need to address the multiple protocol violations, the assault on Dr. Palmer, and the unauthorized medical procedure that initiated this entire situation. Here it comes, Cassidy thought. But before the chairman could continue, General Carr stood up. If I may, he said quietly. The chairman nodded. General Carr looked directly at Cassidy. Sergeant Brennan saved Colonel Ashford's life using advanced trauma techniques that 90% of civilian physicians don't even know exist. She identified a security threat that had been operating undetected for 6 years. She put herself at personal risk to protect a fellow staff member and help dismantle an intelligence network that posed a direct threat to national security. His voice was calm but carried absolute authority. The Department of Defense considers her a national asset, and we take a very dim view of any institution that would punish someone for exemplary service. The room went silent. The chairman shifted uncomfortably. General, we appreciate the federal perspective, but we have hospital policies that... Your policies protected Dr. Palmer while he weaponized your medical systems. Your hierarchy prevented staff from reporting concerns about his behavior. Your administration created an environment where competent professionals were intimidated into silence. General Carr's gaze swept the room. The federal investigation has documented multiple instances of negligence, intimidation, and administrative malpractice at this facility. I'd suggest you focus on fixing those problems before you punish the person who exposed them. Nobody spoke. Holloway looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. The chairman cleared his throat again. Ms. Brennan, in light of the extraordinary circumstances and the federal perspective on your actions, the board has decided to offer you a position as Director of Trauma Services. You would have full authority over emergency protocols, staff training, and crisis response procedures. Cassidy stared at him. You're offering me a promotion? We're offering you the opportunity to help rebuild this institution's trauma program with the standards and expertise you demonstrated throughout this incident. Cassidy looked at Holloway. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked back at the chairman. What happens to Dr. Holloway? The chairman's expression was carefully neutral. Dr. Holloway has agreed to step down from his position as emergency department chief. He'll be transitioning to a research role with significantly reduced patient contact. Translation. They were burying him somewhere he couldn't cause more damage, but keeping him on staff to avoid a wrongful termination lawsuit. Cassidy should have felt satisfied. Instead, she just felt tired. I need time to think about it, she said. Of course. Take a few days. I'll have an answer by end of day. She stood up and walked out before anyone could respond. General Carr caught up with her in the hallway. That was quite a performance in there, he said. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, but you earned it. He paused. The DoD offer still stands too. You could train the next generation of combat medics. Build something that matters. Cassidy looked at him. Can I ask you something, sir? Of course. Why did you really come here today? You didn't need to show up for a hospital board meeting. General Carr was quiet for a moment. Because 6 years ago, you saved 17 soldiers during a mortar attack in Kandahar. One of them was my nephew. He's alive today because you pulled him out of a burning vehicle while insurgents were firing at you. His voice was steady but intense. I owed you this. And I wanted to make sure these people understood who you really are. Cassidy felt something catch in her throat. I was just doing my job. So was I. He handed her his card. Think about the offer. Either way, you've got friends in Washington now. Then he left, his boots echoing in the empty executive hallway. Cassidy stood alone for a long moment. Then she walked down to the emergency department. Rita was at the nurse's station, looking exhausted but alert. She brightened when she saw Cassidy. How did it go? They offered me Holloway's job. Rita's eyes went wide. Are you serious? Director of Trauma Services, full authority over the emergency department. That's amazing. Did you accept? Cassidy leaned against the counter. I don't know if I want it. Why not? You'd be perfect for it. Because this place is broken, Rita. The culture, the politics, the way they treat people. One promotion doesn't fix that. Rita was quiet for a moment. Then she said, So fix it yourself. Cassidy looked at her. What? You spent 6 months being treated like you didn't matter. You watched good people get hurt because bad systems protected bad doctors. You saw everything that was wrong with this place. Rita's voice was fierce. So take the job and burn it all down. Rebuild it the right way. Be the person you needed when you first walked through those doors. Cassidy stared at her friend, and slowly, something shifted inside her chest. Maybe Rita was right. Maybe the answer wasn't walking away. Maybe it was staying and making sure nobody else had to fight the battles she'd fought. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to the board chairman. I accept the position. I start Monday, and I want full authority to restructure staff, revise protocols, and terminate anyone who doesn't meet new standards. The response came back in 30 seconds. Agreed. Welcome aboard, Director Brennan. Rita read the text over her shoulder and grinned. Oh, this is going to be fun. It's going to be brutal. Same thing. Cassidy smiled despite herself. Then her phone rang one more time. Unknown number again. She answered cautiously. Brennan. A different voice this time. Older, refined, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Congratulations on your promotion, Director, and on dismantling our network. Quite impressive. Cassidy's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who appreciates professional competence. Palmer was sloppy. Torres was careless. But you were magnificent. The voice was warm, almost friendly. We'll be watching your career with great interest. You're with the network. I am the network. Or at least the part of it that matters. A pause. Palmer thought he was a critical asset. He wasn't. He was expendable infrastructure. The real operation continues. And now that you've proven yourself so capable, we have a proposition for you. Go to hell, the voice laughed softly. Not yet. First, I wanted to give you a gift. Check your email. You'll find something interesting. The line went dead. Cassidy opened her email with shaking hands. One new message. No sender name, no subject line, just an attachment. A video file. She clicked it. The video showed a hospital room, empty except for medical equipment, and a patient lying unconscious in the bed. The camera zoomed slowly on the patient's face. Colonel Nathan Ashford, at Walter Reed, under 24-hour armed guard. The video timestamp showed it was recorded less than 10 minutes ago. The message was clear. They could still reach him. They could reach anyone. And Cassidy had just accepted a position that would make her a permanent target. Cassidy's hands didn't shake as she forwarded the video to Agent Vega and General Carr simultaneously. Rita was watching her face. What's wrong? They're not done. Who's not done? Cassidy showed her the video. Rita's face went pale. That's Walter Reed. That's supposed to be the most secure military medical facility in the country. Apparently not secure enough. Cassidy's phone rang immediately. General Carr. I just saw the video, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Walter Reed Security is conducting a sweep right now. Colonel Ashford is being moved to an undisclosed location. It won't matter. If they got close enough to film him once, they can do it again. Then what do you suggest? Cassidy looked at Rita, then at the emergency department stretching out behind her, the place that had tried to break her and failed. I suggest we stop running and start hunting. Explain. They contacted me because they want something. They wouldn't have revealed themselves otherwise, which means they're not as invincible as they want us to believe. Or they're baiting another trap. Probably, but I'm done playing defense. Carr was quiet for a moment. What do you need? Access to everything Palmer gave up during interrogation. Every name, every facility, every operational detail. And I need it now. That information is classified. So is Colonel Ashford's location. Classification didn't stop them from walking right into Walter Reed and filming him. Another pause. I'll have everything sent to your secure phone within the hour. But Brennan, this goes beyond hospital politics now. You're talking about hunting an intelligence network with resources we haven't fully mapped. I know, but they made a mistake. What mistake? They threatened someone I care about. Again, Cassidy's voice went cold and flat. And I'm very good at making people regret that. She hung up and turned to Rita. Go home. Pack a bag. Stay with family or friends for the next few days. Rita's jaw set stubbornly. No. Rita, no. You're not pushing me away to keep me safe. I'm already in this. Palmer kidnapped me because of what I saw. Running away won't change that. They'll come after you again. Then they'll have to deal with both of us. Cassidy wanted to argue, but the look in Rita's eyes made it clear that wouldn't work. Fine, but you do exactly what I say, when I say it. Deal. The secure phone buzzed. A massive encrypted file from General Carr, Palmer's complete interrogation transcript, plus intelligence summaries from the ongoing investigation. Cassidy sat down at the nurse's station and started reading. Palmer had talked for hours, giving up operational details, with the desperate enthusiasm of someone trying to save himself from a life sentence. The network was even larger than Colonel Ashford's files suggested. Not 17 compromised facilities, but 23. Not 3 states, but 7. The scope was staggering, but one detail kept repeating through Palmer's testimony. Someone he referred to only as the coordinator. The person who'd recruited him out of medical school. The person who gave strategic direction. The person who decided which targets mattered and which didn't. Palmer had never met the coordinator face to face. All communication happened through encrypted channels and dead drops. But he'd provided one critical piece of information. The coordinator had medical training and specialized knowledge of military trauma systems, which meant the coordinator had walked the same path Cassidy had. Combat medicine. Battlefield trauma. The kind of experience that changed how you saw the world. Someone who understood that healthcare infrastructure was the perfect weapon because everyone trusted it. Cassidy pulled up the list of personnel at Mercy Ridge with military medical backgrounds. 3 names besides herself and Torres. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, trauma surgeon, Navy Medical Corps veteran, 15 years at Mercy Ridge. Nurse James Delacroix, intensive care specialist, Army medic background, 8 years at Mercy Ridge. And Dr. Ellen Graves, chief of emergency medicine before Holloway, retired 5 years ago but still held consulting privileges. Cassidy stared at the last name. Graves. Same last name as the hospital wing that housed administrative offices. She pulled up Dr. Ellen Graves's personnel file. Army physician, served in Desert Storm and Iraq. Multiple combat commendations. Pioneered several emergency trauma protocols still in use today. Retired from Mercy Ridge in 2019 but maintained advisory status. And according to hospital records, she still had full access to medical systems. Cassidy felt pieces clicking into place. She called Agent Vega. I need you to investigate someone. Dr. Ellen Graves, former chief of emergency medicine at Mercy Ridge. Why? Because I think she's the coordinator. Vega was silent for a beat. That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have? Operational profile. She has medical expertise, military background, institutional access, and the perfect cover. A retired doctor who nobody pays attention to anymore. Cassidy pulled up more files. And look at the timeline. The network's activity at Mercy Ridge started 6 years ago, right after Holloway took over her position. She would have had motive, anger at being pushed out, resentment at watching someone less qualified replace her. That's speculation. Then let's make it evidence. Run her financials, check her travel records, see if there's any pattern that matches network operations. I'll need authorization. Then get it. Because if I'm right, she's already watching us have this conversation. Cassidy hung up and turned to Rita. Do you remember Dr. Graves? Rita frowned. The old ER chief? Yeah, barely. She retired before I started working here, but some of the older nurses still talk about her like she was a legend. What kind of legend? The kind who ran the emergency department like a military operation. Brilliant doctor, tough as hell, didn't tolerate mistakes from anyone. Rita paused. Why? Because I think she's the one who built this network, and I think she's been using Mercy Ridge as her headquarters the entire time. Rita's eyes widened. That's why Palmer was planted here. Why Torres got hired. She recruited them herself. And now she's trying to recruit me. Cassidy's regular phone rang. Unknown number. She answered on speaker so Rita could hear. I'm impressed, the coordinator's voice said warmly. Most people would have taken days to identify me. You managed it in under an hour. Dr. Graves. Please call me Ellen. We're colleagues now. We're not colleagues. No? You saved lives under impossible conditions. I built systems to ensure those lives could continue being saved. We're more alike than you want to admit. I don't weaponize hospitals. Neither do I. I optimize them. Medical infrastructure is inefficient, underfunded, and controlled by bureaucrats who've never seen real trauma. I simply found ways to make it serve better purposes. Cassidy kept her voice level. By killing people. By eliminating threats to national security. Colonel Ashford was investigating programs that keep soldiers alive in the field. If his investigation had succeeded, those programs would have been dismantled. Hundreds of service members would have died unnecessarily. Ellen's voice was reasonable, almost kind. I made a tactical decision to preserve operational capability. You tried to kill him because he discovered your spy network. I tried to kill him because he threatened something bigger than himself. Just like I'm trying to recruit you because you're too valuable to waste. I'm not interested. Then you're a fool. You spent 6 months being humiliated by incompetent physicians. You watched patients die because hospital politics valued hierarchy over skill. You know exactly how broken this system is. Ellen paused. I'm offering you a chance to fix it. Join us, and you'll have resources to build trauma programs that actually work. Training facilities, equipment, funding, everything you need to save lives at scale. Under your control. Under our collective vision. The network isn't a criminal conspiracy, Cassidy. It's a shadow organization working to protect operational security while incompetent bureaucrats play political games. Rita was staring at Cassidy with wide eyes. Cassidy took a slow breath. You sent me that video of Colonel Ashford to prove you can reach anyone, but you made a mistake. What mistake? You assumed fear would make me cooperate, but all you did was show me that you're desperate. Ellen's voice hardened slightly. Desperate? You wouldn't have contacted me directly if the network was secure. Palmer and Torres getting arrested shattered your infrastructure. Your safe operations are compromised. And now you're scrambling to rebuild before federal investigators finish mapping your organization. Cassidy leaned forward. So you reached out to me, someone with the right skills and background, hoping I'd be angry enough at Mercy Ridge to join you. But you miscalculated. How so? I'm not angry at Mercy Ridge. I'm angry at people like you who turn medicine into warfare. Silence on the line. Then Ellen laughed softly. You really believe you're on the right side here? I know I am. Then you're even more naive than I thought. Let me educate you about how the real world works, Cassidy. The federal agents investigating this network, half of them are on surveillance lists themselves. The generals giving you orders, they're protecting budgets and careers, not principles. Colonel Ashford, he was leaking information to congressional oversight committees to further his own political ambitions. Her voice was cold now. There are no heroes in this story. Just people trying to survive in a system designed to break them. Maybe, but I'd rather try to fix that system than burn it down. Fix it? Ellen's laugh was bitter. You can't fix corruption from inside the corruption. You can only build something new outside of it. Is that what you tell yourself? That you're building something better? I know I am, and someday you'll understand that too. After you've spent enough years watching bureaucrats destroy everything you care about, you'll realize there's only one solution. What's that? Take control yourself. The line went dead. Cassidy sat back, her mind racing. Rita exhaled slowly. That was terrifying. That was confirmation. She's vulnerable and she knows it. So what do we do? Cassidy pulled up the hospital system on the nurse's station computer. We find her. She accessed Dr. Graves's consulting credentials. Still active, still giving her network access to Mercy Ridge systems. Cassidy tracked her login activity over the past 6 months. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Dr. Graves accessed hospital systems remotely almost every day, usually late at night, but 3 times in the past month she'd logged in from inside the hospital itself. From a terminal in the old emergency department building, the one that had been converted to storage after the new wing opened 8 years ago. Nobody went there anymore except maintenance staff, which made it the perfect place to hide. Cassidy grabbed her phone and called Agent Vega. Did you get authorization to investigate Graves? Working on it. Why? Because I know where she is, and I'm going there now. Wait for backup, Brennan. Don't go in alone. She's watching federal communications. If you send a tactical team, she'll disappear, but she won't run from me. How do you know? Because she thinks she can still recruit me. Cassidy hung up before Vega could argue. Rita grabbed her arm. You can't seriously be going after her alone. I'm not. You're coming with me. What? No, that's insane. She's expecting me to bring federal agents. She'll have escape routes planned for that. But she's not expecting me to bring a nurse who's supposed to be traumatized in hiding. Rita stared at her. You want to use me as bait? I want to use both of us as bait. She revealed herself because she's desperate. Now we make her more desperate. This is the worst plan I've ever heard. You have a better one? Rita thought for a moment, then shook her head. Fine, but if we die, I'm haunting you. Deal. They walked through Mercy Ridge toward the old emergency building, moving through corridors that grew increasingly abandoned and neglected. The new wing was all glass and modern architecture. The old wing was cinder block and flickering fluorescent lights that hadn't been replaced in years. The entrance was secured with a keycard lock. Cassidy used her new director credentials, activated less than an hour ago, to unlock it. Inside, the space was exactly as depressing as she'd expected. Old gurneys stacked against walls, broken equipment waiting for disposal, the smell of dust and disuse. And at the far end, light showed under a closed office door. Cassidy and Rita approached slowly. Cassidy knocked once. Come in, Cassidy, Ellen's voice called. I've been expecting you. They entered. The office had been converted into something between a command center and a bunker. Multiple computer screens showed hospital systems, federal databases, and surveillance feeds. Maps covered one wall with pins marking locations across 7 states. A cot in the corner suggested Ellen had been living here. Ellen Graves herself sat behind a desk that had probably been abandoned decades ago. She was in her late 60s, with steel gray hair pulled back and eyes that missed nothing. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, but carried herself with military bearing that made her look dangerous, even sitting down. She smiled when she saw Rita. You brought a friend. How touching. She knows everything, Cassidy said. No point hiding her anymore. True. Ellen gestured to 2 chairs. Sit. Let's talk like professionals. Cassidy and Rita sat. Ellen studied them both for a moment. I meant what I said on the phone, Cassidy. You're wasted here. The work you could do with proper resources would save thousands of lives. All you have to do is stop pretending the system can be saved from within. The system has problems, Cassidy agreed, but the solution isn't espionage and murder, isn't it? You killed insurgents in Kandahar to protect soldiers. How is that different from eliminating security threats to protect operational capability? Because insurgents were enemy combatants, Colonel Ashford is an American officer doing his job. His job was exposing programs that keep our people alive. That made him a threat. His job was stopping people like you from selling intelligence to foreign actors. Ellen's expression hardened. I never sold anything. Everything I did was to protect American lives. By compromising military hospitals? By recruiting spies inside medical facilities? By ensuring critical resources weren't wasted on bureaucratic politics? Ellen's voice rose slightly. Do you have any idea how many soldiers died in Iraq and Afghanistan because supply chains were corrupted? Because equipment didn't arrive on time? Because politicians cared more about budgets than lives? She leaned forward. I built this network to fix that, to create infrastructure that couldn't be compromised by incompetence. You built a criminal conspiracy. I built a solution, and it worked. For 6 years, we've diverted resources where they were needed, protected classified operations from congressional meddling, and ensured combat medics had equipment that saved lives. The network you're trying to destroy has a better track record than the government systems we bypassed. Cassidy shook her head. You can rationalize it however you want, but you crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. Lines drawn by people who've never held someone's intestines inside their body while mortars fall. Lines drawn by politicians who send soldiers to die and then cut funding for their medical care. Ellen's voice was intense. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You've lived it. I have. But that doesn't justify what you've done. Then what does justify it? Watching more soldiers bleed out because some Pentagon analyst decided trauma equipment wasn't budget priority? Watching good doctors get forced out by incompetent administrators? Ellen gestured at the hospital around them. This institution pushed me out after 30 years because I was too difficult to work with. Translation. I demanded competence and accountability, so I found another way to continue serving. Rita spoke up for the first time. By kidnapping me? By trying to kill Colonel Ashford? That's serving? Ellen looked at her coldly. Acceptable losses. We're not losses, Rita said, her voice shaking slightly but fierce. We're people, and you don't get to decide our lives don't matter because you think you're serving some greater purpose. I've saved more lives through this network than you'll see in your entire career. You've also destroyed them. That doesn't balance out. Ellen stood up abruptly. I didn't bring you here to debate philosophy. I brought you here to make a final offer. She looked at Cassidy. Join us. Help rebuild what Palmer and Torres compromised, or walk away and spend the rest of your career fighting an organization that's already 10 steps ahead of you. Cassidy stood as well. There's a third option. What's that? You surrender, right now. Tell federal investigators everything. Dismantle the network yourself and accept responsibility for what you've done. Ellen stared at her. Then she laughed. You actually believe that would work? That one person admitting guilt would stop an organization built over 6 years across 7 states? She shook her head. I'm not the network, Cassidy. I'm just one node. If I disappear, someone else takes over. The infrastructure continues. Then we'll keep dismantling it, one node at a time. You'll spend your entire life chasing shadows. Maybe, but at least I'll sleep at night. Ellen's expression shifted, disappointment mixing with something that looked almost like regret. I really hoped you'd understand. We could have built something remarkable together. We still can, by fixing the system properly instead of corrupting it. Ellen reached into her desk drawer. Cassidy's hand went to her waistband where she'd hidden her service knife before entering. But Ellen didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a USB drive and set it on the desk. That contains everything. Every facility, every operation, every person involved in the network. Names, dates, financial records, communication logs, all of it. Cassidy stared at the drive. Why? Because you're right about one thing. I am desperate. Palmer's arrest triggered contingency protocols that are tearing the network apart anyway. Within a week, most of it will be burned and scattered. This drive is my insurance policy. Insurance for what? For making sure history remembers that we tried to fix things the broken system refused to address. Ellen pushed the drive across the desk. Take it. Give it to your federal friends. Let them prosecute everyone on it. But know that every person you destroy was someone who saw the same problems you saw and chose to act. Cassidy picked up the drive slowly. This is a confession. This is documentation. What you do with it is your choice. Rita grabbed Cassidy's arm. It could be a trap, a virus, or false information. It's real, Ellen said tiredly. I have nothing left to lose by giving it to you. The network is already collapsing. I'm just choosing how the story ends. Cassidy studied Ellen's face, looking for deception, for hidden angles, for any sign this was another manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion. You'll still be prosecuted, Cassidy said quietly. I know, but I'll be prosecuted for trying to save lives while incompetent bureaucrats were playing politics. That's a legacy I can live with. You tried to kill people. I tried to protect operations that saved lives. Colonel Ashford survived. Palmer is facing justice. Torres will spend years in prison. The system you're defending will process us all according to its rules. Ellen's voice was steady. But 10 years from now, when another soldier bleeds out because supply chains are corrupted, someone will remember that we tried to fix this. And maybe they'll find a better way. Cassidy slipped the USB drive into her pocket. I'll make sure they do, but not by repeating your mistakes. She turned to leave. Ellen called after her. Cassidy. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, you would have been magnificent with us. I know. That's why I'm not joining you. They walked out, leaving Ellen Graves sitting alone in her makeshift command center. Agent Vega was waiting outside with a tactical team, 8 agents in full gear who'd surrounded the building while Cassidy and Rita were inside. Jesus Christ, Brennan, Vega snapped. I told you to wait for backup. You would have scared her off. She could have killed you. But she didn't. She gave us this instead. Cassidy handed over the USB drive. Vega stared at it like it might explode. What is this? Everything, the entire network, Ellen Graves' final confession. Agents moved past them into the building. Cassidy heard radio chatter as they secured Ellen and started processing the command center as a crime scene. Rita was shaking slightly. Cassidy put an arm around her shoulders. You did good in there. I was terrified the entire time. So was I. You didn't look terrified. Practice. They walked back to the main hospital building as dawn started breaking over Columbus. The parking lot was filling with morning shift staff. The emergency department was gearing up for another day. Life continued like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Cassidy's secure phone buzzed. General Carr. Dr. Graves is in custody. The USB drive is being processed by DoD Cyber Forensics right now. Initial assessment says it's legitimate. She really did give you the entire network. Good. This is going to create shockwaves, congressional hearings, military investigations, media coverage that'll last months. You prepared for that? Cassidy looked at Mercy Ridge Medical Center, the building that had tried to break her and failed. Yeah, I'm prepared. One more thing. The DoD contractor position is still available if you want it. Building trauma training programs, developing new protocols, teaching the next generation. It's clean work, important work, and it would get you away from all of this. Cassidy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I appreciate the offer, General, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be. You sure? Mercy Ridge won't be an easy place to rebuild. Nothing worth doing is easy. Carr was silent, then he chuckled. You sound like a commander I used to know. She would have liked you. She? Dr. Ellen Graves. Before she went off the rails, she was one of the finest trauma surgeons I ever worked with. Saved my life in Kuwait in '91. His voice went quiet. Somewhere along the way, she forgot that the people she was trying to protect are the same ones she was willing to sacrifice. That's the problem with seeing everything as war, Cassidy said. Eventually, everyone becomes either an asset or a casualty. Don't let that happen to you, Sergeant. I'll try not to. She hung up and found Rita waiting by the emergency department entrance. So, Rita said, Director of Trauma Services. That's actually happening. Apparently. You know everyone's going to hate you at first, right? The doctors who protected Palmer, the administrators who enabled Holloway, all the people who benefit from the broken system, they're all going to fight you. I know. And you're still taking the job. Someone has to fix this place. Might as well be me. Rita smiled. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. You've said that before. It's still true. They walked inside together. The emergency department was in morning chaos. Patients checking in, nurses running triage, the controlled disorder that came with the start of a new shift. Cassidy moved through it with Rita at her side. And for the first time in 6 months, it felt right. Not easy, not perfect, but right. Over the next 3 months, Cassidy rebuilt Mercy Ridge's emergency department from the ground up. She fired 6 physicians for documented incompetence and negligence. She promoted 4 nurses to leadership positions based on skill rather than seniority. She rewrote every major protocol, bringing in expertise from military trauma systems and modern civilian best practices. The staff hated her at first. Then they saw the results. Patient outcomes improved. Wait times dropped. Staff morale rose as people who actually knew what they were doing got the authority to make decisions. The changes rippled outward from the emergency department to other parts of the hospital. Mercy Ridge started becoming the kind of place Cassidy had hoped it would be when she first arrived. Dr. Holloway resigned completely after an independent review documented his pattern of negligence. Palmer was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Torres got 12. Ellen Graves was still awaiting trial, but the evidence was overwhelming. She'd face decades behind bars. The network she'd built was dismantled piece by piece as federal investigators used the USB drive to prosecute conspirators across 7 states. 23 compromised facilities were secured. 47 people were arrested. The scandal made national headlines for weeks. But Cassidy barely paid attention to the media coverage. She was too busy doing the work. 6 months after accepting the director position, she was in the trauma bay when a patient arrived with catastrophic injuries from a construction accident. The attending physician, one of the ones she'd personally hired, froze in panic, uncertain how to proceed. Cassidy stepped in without hesitation. Tension pneumothorax, prep for chest decompression. The physician moved immediately, following her lead. They worked together for 40 minutes. Stabilizing the patient and getting him to surgery with a genuine chance of survival. When it was over, the physician approached Cassidy in the hallway. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't know what I was thinking in there. You were thinking it was complicated, but sometimes the answer is simple. Just do the next right thing. He nodded slowly. Is it always this intense? No, sometimes it's worse. He almost smiled. How do you handle it? Cassidy thought about Kandahar, about the soldiers she'd saved and the ones she couldn't, about Ellen Graves and Palmer and everyone who'd mistaken ruthlessness for strength. By remembering that the work matters more than the fear. She walked away before he could respond. Rita found her in the break room an hour later, sitting with terrible coffee and reviewing staffing schedules. You look exhausted, Rita said. I am exhausted. Good. That means you're doing it right. Cassidy looked up. How do you figure? Because rebuilding something broken is supposed to be exhausting. If it was easy, someone would have done it already. Rita sat down across from her. I got an offer today. University Hospital in Cleveland wants me to help develop their trauma nursing program. Better pay, prestige, the whole thing. Cassidy's chest tightened. You're leaving? I turned it down. Why? Rita smiled. Because this is where the real work is happening. Cleveland's emergency department is already functional. They don't need me, but Mercy Ridge does. You do. She paused. Besides, someone has to make sure you don't work yourself into an early grave. I appreciate that. I know you do. That's why we're friends. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Rita said, Do you ever regret it? Taking this job instead of the DOD position? Cassidy thought about it honestly. Sometimes, when I'm dealing with hospital politics or budget meetings or administrators who still don't understand why things needed to change. She looked at Rita. But then I see patients walk out of here alive who wouldn't have survived 6 months ago. I see staff members who are actually respected for their competence instead of bullied for speaking up, and I remember why this matters. Because you're fixing the system from inside instead of burning it down from outside. Because I'm proving it can be fixed at all. Ellen Graves gave up on that. She decided the only solution was destruction and control. But that's not a solution. It's just replacing one broken system with another. Rita nodded slowly. You think she understands that now? I don't know. But maybe someone watching her trial will. Maybe the next person who gets pushed out of a job or silenced by hierarchy will remember that there's another way. By staying and fighting. By staying and building. Rita stood up and grabbed the coffee pot. Well then, we better get back to work. They returned to the emergency department together. The rest of the shift was routine chaos. Broken bones, chest pain, a kid who'd swallowed a toy. Normal emergencies that got resolved through competence and teamwork instead of ego and hierarchy. At the end of the day, Cassidy did her final rounds through the trauma bays, checking equipment and reviewing cases. Everything was in order. Patients were stable. Staff was prepared for the night shift. She stood in the empty trauma bay where she'd saved Colonel Ashford's life 7 months ago. The room looked different now. New equipment, better organization, an atmosphere of readiness instead of barely controlled chaos. But the core was the same. This was where lives got saved or lost based on seconds and decisions and the willingness to act when everything was falling apart. Cassidy had spent 6 months being told she didn't matter. Then she'd proven that everyone who said that was wrong. Not through violence or corruption or compromising her principles. Through competence. Through courage. Through refusing to accept that broken systems couldn't be fixed. She walked out of Mercy Ridge into the October evening. Columbus spread out before her, the city where she'd come looking for peace and found war instead. But it was also the city where she'd discovered something more important than peace. Purpose. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. For a moment, fear spiked. Another threat, another conspiracy, another crisis. But the message was simple. Colonel Ashford released from Walter Reed today. Full recovery expected. He asked me to tell you thank you. General Carr Cassidy smiled. Then she got in her car and drove home through streets that no longer felt hostile. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. But it was happening, and that was enough. Because Cassidy Brennan had learned the most important lesson of her career, the one that Ellen Graves had forgotten and Palmer had never understood. Authority isn't something you're given through titles or hierarchy or fear. It's something you earn by being the person who stays calm when everyone else is panicking, by making the right call even when it costs you everything, by refusing to let systems break you and choosing instead to bend those systems towards something better. She'd been called just a nurse, an outsider, someone who didn't understand how things really worked. But she'd proven that sometimes the people who don't understand how things work are exactly the ones who can fix them. Because they're not invested in protecting the broken system. They're invested in protecting the people that system is supposed to serve. Cassidy parked outside her apartment and sat in the darkness for a moment. Then she got out and walked inside, ready to face tomorrow, ready to keep building, ready to prove that the quiet strength of someone who refuses to give up is more powerful than all the corruption and fear and violence in the world. Because at the end of the day, that's what saved Colonel Ashford's life. That's what dismantled the network. That's what rebuilt Mercy Ridge, not weapons or authority or clever tactics. Just one person who decided that doing the right thing mattered more than staying safe. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything.